Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world you've probably only glimpsed in period dramas. The silk-lined corridors, murmured conversations behind feathered fans, and the kind of courtly power that's exercised from behind closed doors, often in the dead of night. You're going to be a royal mistress. And yeah, you probably won't survive this, not with your reputation intact at least. The gowns are tight, the court's tighter, and somewhere in that glimmering waltz of candlelight and compromise, your life becomes both opulent and wildly precarious. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me where you're watching from, and what time it is for you. Are you nestled under a blanket at 11 PM in Vancouver, dozing off to royal scandal in Sao Paulo? I want to know. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It starts with whispers. Not declarations, not letters sealed in wax, just your name passing from mouth to mouth. First, a courtier mentions your eyes, then a chamberlain observes your dancing. You're not from noble blood exactly, but your father's title is old enough, and your cheekbones have a way of catching the candlelight that makes people pause. You're invited to a ball, innocently of course. It's just a social event, a seasonal affair. But everyone knows what it means. You go because not going would be worse. At court, silence is a decision. Absence is a statement, and you're too clever for that. Your first dress for the event is a small war of choices. The neckline, bold, but not vulgar. The sleeves, French, because that's the style the Queen hates, and the Queen's opinion isn't the one you're here for tonight, is it? Your maid does your hair 3 times. You throw out your shoes twice. Finally, you arrive in a gown that whispers approachable, but roars, notice me. And everyone does. The palace is everything you've imagined. Marble floors cold under your slippers, chandeliers dripping with candlelight. Perfume clouds the air like mist, and there's music. Constant, spiralling, like the pulse of the building itself. Courtiers move like chess pieces, never quite still, always angled, always calculating. You glide in, eyes scanning you with soft smiles and hard thoughts. You belong here, but barely. And then he sees you. The king. He's older than you expected. More human too. His eyes are sharp, but his face is flushed from wine, and there's a weary ache to his posture, like ruling a country has worn down his bones. But when he looks at you, it's like he's seen the only clear thing in a storm. You don't look away. Later, when you're back in your borrowed carriage, the city rolling by like a dream, your heart is beating like a drum under your corset. You didn't speak. Not once. He didn't need. You two, the look was enough. And by morning you'll have a letter. There's a strange energy to the hours before it arrives. You pretend to be indifferent. You sip tea. You walk with friends through the rose gardens as if the world is not tilting beneath you. But inside you're watching the servants, listening for hooves. Every pause of silence stretches long and thin, like spun sugar. Finally, the knock. It's not sealed with the royal crest, of course. Too obvious. But the handwriting is unmistakable. A velvet envelope. A request for your company at an informal supper. Which means, don't tell your mother, and don't bring a chaperone. And here's where the real tension coils. It's not just flattery. It's not just a meal. It's a fork in the road. One way leads to obscurity. Playing polite wife to some baron with gout. Raising kids. Throwing stiff dinner parties. The other path, it's glamour and gifts and raw, invisible power. But it's also knives in your back, rumours on your name, and the very real chance that this all ends with you exiled, ruined, or worse. You say yes, because how could you not? You arrive at the private wing of the palace, more modest, more shadowed. A butler greets you like you're already part of the furniture. You're shown in. The king is there, of course. Smiling like this isn't the 100th girl he's done this with. But he listens when you speak. He laughs at the right moments. He brushes your hand once, lightly, and you feel the gravity shift again. You don't sleep with him that night. That would be too easy. Instead, you charm. You discuss the court, the country. You prove you're more than a painted face. And when you leave, just before midnight, his fingers linger on yours longer than they should. Word spreads instantly. They always say the court is made of marble and whispers. That night, it's all whispers. The queen knows. The courtiers know. The other women who thought they were in line for that velvet seat next to the throne. Oh, they know. One foot in the palace, the other already slipping. You lie awake that night wondering what you've done, wondering if it was your laugh, your eyes, your silence, or maybe it was never about you at all. Maybe he just needed a new story to play out, and you were perfectly positioned to be Act 1. Still you feel it, don't you? That shimmer of possibility, that nervous thrill, the knowledge that tomorrow everything changes. Fact check. One of the most influential royal mistresses in history, Madame de Pompadour, wielded genuine political influence during Louis XV's reign, proving that the role could be more than ornamental. Fringe note. Some mistresses were trained from a young age to serve at court, coached in flirtation and manipulation like it was a job, which, weirdly, it was. Debated detail. Scholars still argue whether early court mistresses held real agency, or were just pawns shuffled by male advisors in powder wigs. The letter. The next morning is less velvet and more steel. You don't notice it at first, lying beside your breakfast tray like any other scrap of court correspondence, but the seal is a subtle sign. Not royal, he wouldn't be that clumsy, but bearing the insignia of one of his most trusted advisors. Inside, a simple request. You're invited to join His Majesty again this evening, in more private company, for a quieter discussion. And yes, they mean the royal apartments. You're being summoned. Delicately, discreetly, but unmistakably. You don't breathe for a full 10 seconds. Then, as your maid pours your tea with her eyes carefully fixed on the cup, you realise she already knows. Of course she does. News moves through servants like lightning. Unseen but devastating. The other girls in your household are suspiciously kind today. Your mother is unusually silent, and your father, ever the opportunist, has suddenly taken a new interest in your schedule. They smell it too, the possibility of proximity to power, and they know it comes at a price. You spend the day preparing, not frantically, but with a cold kind of precision. Every decision, hair, scent, undergarments, shoes, is layered in calculation. Not seductive, but suggestive. Not extravagant, but unmistakably expensive. When you step into the mirror before leaving, you don't even recognise yourself. That girl from the countryside or the lesser city estate is gone. This creature looking back at you is deliberate, glossed, softly dangerous. The palace corridors feel different at night. Fewer guards, more candles, the marble quieter under your feet. You're led not to the main throne wing or the usual halls of diplomacy, but deeper, to the older part of the palace. Rooms with tapestries that predate your grandparents, and windows with panes so thin you can feel the night through them. You're guided to a small salon that smells like brandy and firewood. The king is there, and this time, so is his dog, curled at his feet like he's done this 1,000 times. He's less formal tonight, still regal, still commanding, but his robe is loose, and his tone softer. He invites you to sit, offers you wine, doesn't rush. This isn't seduction in the way you imagined it. No thunderclap of passion, no dramatic declarations. It's more like you're slowly being drafted into a secret order. Every word he says, every question he asks is an invitation to reveal something of yourself. Not too much, just enough to show you understand the game. He asks if you've read Voltaire. You lie and say yes. He smiles like he knows you're lying and doesn't mind. You ask about the gardens, about the French court, about how often he truly sees his ministers. His laugh is genuine when you say, "I imagine they bore you." You wonder if this is what it felt like for the last one, the one whose portrait still hangs in the gallery, eyes frozen in a gaze that now feels hauntingly familiar. He doesn't touch you until the very end. A kiss to your hand, lips lingering. Then his fingers, warm and ringed with gold, curl around yours and he says, "I hope I'll see you again tomorrow." You nod. Say something clever and forgettable. Then leave, heart pounding like a trapped animal. The next day everything changes. You're given chambers. Not near the Queen, not even in the same wing, but certainly within the palace. You've never seen anything like it. Plush carpets, windows that look over the gardens instead of the kitchens, a bathtub big enough to drown in. The servants call you Mademoiselle with just a hint too much respect. You receive gifts, books, chocolates, a small clock with your initials etched into the brass. Nothing direct, no letters signed with his name, but the message is clear. You are now his. Not officially. That would cause too much trouble. The Queen's influence, though quiet, is substantial, and the court remains a battlefield of factions. Old families, new titles, clergy, generals, and the ever-watchful foreign ambassadors. You are a shadow guest in this world, given privileges without protection, and with no guarantee that the candle won't burn out tomorrow. You eat breakfast alone now, but never unaccompanied. There is always a lady-in-waiting assigned to assist you. She smiles too broadly and watches too closely. The Queen's agent, no doubt. Everything you say is reported. Every dress you wear is catalogued. You begin to realise that your very presence at court has created a fault line, and everyone is just waiting to see where the next tremor will strike. Yet there's power in it too. At a dinner hosted by the Duke of Montclair, you're seated far closer to the king than your rank would justify. He glances at you twice, once when you laugh too loudly, and again when the French ambassador addresses you directly. Afterward, courtiers begin inviting you to things they never would have before: garden parties, private salons, poetry readings. They want your favour, they want your ear, because even though you are not titled, not married, not royal, you are visible. And that's all that matters. You begin receiving letters, not from him, those remain rare, but from courtiers. Some flirtatious, others overtly political. One lady suggests a potential alliance through marriage with her cousin, an earl. You laugh, reading it, because marriage is no longer a ladder for you, it would be a fall. But even as you rise, you start to notice the glances. Some pity, some envy, some thick with the kind of hatred that doesn't speak aloud but finds its way into rumours and whispered jokes. The other mistresses, those before you, those still pretending to be above it all, begin to circle like vultures. They drop comments about your manners, your accent, your supposed ambitions. One even leaves a fan embroidered with a snake outside your door. Still, the king continues to summon you, sometimes nightly, sometimes not at all for a week, and you sit in your ornate rooms wondering if it's already over. But it never is. He likes you, or needs you, or maybe both, and that is both your gift and your curse. Fact check. Louis XIV once housed his mistress, Madame de Montespan, in a lavish apartment directly above his own chambers, an arrangement that sparked endless palace intrigue. Fringe note. Some mistresses were given pet names in court correspondence, so if intercepted, no one would know who they referred to. One was simply called the Swallow. Debated detail. Historians still argue how much genuine affection played a role in these affairs, or whether they were purely transactional arrangements veiled in romance. The first time you truly walk into court as someone the king favours, it's not with trumpets or applause. It's in a low hum of glances and half-turned shoulders. You can feel it sliding over your skin, the way people look at you now, as if you've crossed a line they can't or won't admit exists. Your gown today is deliberate. Soft gold silk, tight-laced bodice, delicate lace at the throat. Not loud, but unmistakably expensive. Not queenly, never that, but quietly dangerous. The kind of look that says, yes, he sees me, and yes, I know you see that too. The ballroom is brighter than usual tonight. Candles drip light down over every surface, and the chandeliers tinkle like distant bells. Ministers mill near the tapestries. Military officers hover by the refreshment tables, and a few daring nobles, mostly the younger, dumber ones, circle near you, pretending their path just happened to brush past yours. You smile politely, offer a few words, but you know better than to say too much. That's the trick here, the balance between seen and mysterious. You must be present, but never too accessible. Warm, but untouchable. And then, without fanfare, the king enters. He's wearing a blue sash tonight, the one stitched with tiny golden fleur-de-lis. He doesn't come to you, not directly. But his eyes scan the room, pause, only for a moment, on yours, and then move on. That's all it takes. A look like a string pulled across the crowd. You're now tethered in everyone's mind. You belong to him. It's intoxicating and it's terrifying. Because with that look, you've stopped being a girl at court. You've become a symbol. To some, you're his mistress. To others, you're a threat. And to a very specific group of people, the Queen's ladies mostly, you're a nuisance that needs to be managed, preferably by social ruin. They don't strike all at once. That would be too vulgar. No, their tactics are the slow kind. Misaddressed invitations, slight changes in seating, carefully phrased compliments that slice deeper than insults. One tells you gently that your accent reminds her of the countryside. Another marvels at how little perfume you wear. So natural, she says, which really means unrefined. And at the end of the night you find a note left in your pocket, unsigned. He never keeps one long. You pretend to laugh. You even share the note with your maid, making light of it. But in the stillness of your room, after the candles are snuffed and your stays loosened, the words echo harder than they should. You wonder who wrote it. Which of them wants you gone so badly they'd risk a clumsy little threat? The next morning you're summoned again, but this time not by the king. The chief chamberlain, a sour little man with a voice like creaking parchment, requests your presence. You're led through unfamiliar halls, past guards who don't recognise you yet, to a room lined with portraits and too many chairs, and waiting there is the Queen's brother. You've never met him before, but of course you know who he is. Everyone knows. He doesn't rise when you enter, just gestures to a chair and studies you like a taxidermist inspecting his next subject. He talks about court decorum, about influence, about the importance of balance in the royal household, but mostly he talks about your behaviour. You haven't done anything, not really, but you've been seen, too often, too confidently. You've laughed too freely, you've walked where only nobles should, you've dared to sit too close at court dinners, and while the king may enjoy your company, others, important others, are not amused. You leave the room pale, your pulse racing. That was a warning, make no mistake. Not from the king, not even from the queen, not directly, but from the court itself. You've upset the balance of the game, and now they're trying to remind you who built the board. That night you're not invited to supper. The message is clear, though no one says it aloud. This is the test. Can you handle exile for a night? Can you maintain grace without attention? You sit alone in your chamber while the palace glows without you. You eat soup quietly while imagining the laughter in the great hall, and you wonder, desperately, whether your name is still on his lips tonight. But the next morning, a single red rose appears on your dressing table. No note, no signature, just that. And you exhale like you've been holding your breath for days. Still, you've learned something. You cannot survive this by charm alone. You need allies. So you start noticing. Who gossips, who listens, who drinks too much and reveals too little. You discover that Lady B, too well connected for anyone's comfort, has a gambling problem, and Lord C's handsome valet is more than just an employee. You keep notes, small ones, tucked in a book coded in French phrases. If you're going to stay, you'll need leverage, and if you're going to rise, you'll need strategy. One afternoon, in the library, you accidentally leave behind a volume on the Greek philosophers, knowing full well the king visits that same corner each Tuesday. The next day, it's returned to your room with a ribbon tied around it. Inside, tucked between the pages, is a slip of parchment with one word: clever. You laugh out loud for the first time in days. Fact check. Royal mistresses in 18th century France often formed alliances with court factions to maintain their position. Some even acted as informal political advisors. Fringe note: at Versailles, a mistress's scent became a signature. Entire perfume recipes were created to make her presence felt, even in her absence. Debated detail. It's still uncertain whether some of these women wielded true behind-the-throne power, or if historians inflated their influence to fit the romance of scandal. The gaze comes again, not at a private supper or in a shadowed hallway this time, but right in the middle of a state ball, under a ceiling painted with gods who would have laughed at your predicament. The room smells of roses and powdered wigs, of too many perfumes mingling in a battle for dominance. Musicians scrape out a minuet. Nobles glide across the marble like they were born with ballroom shoes instead of feet, and there, near the dais, the king's eyes find you. He's listening to a minister, nodding, wine in one hand, but it's you he's watching. And this time, it's not subtle. The people around you catch it instantly. Conversations dip mid-sentence. A duchess pauses with a sugared almond halfway to her lips. A young viscount turns crimson because he'd been just about to ask you to dance, and now he's pretending he was actually reaching for the wine. No one moves toward you, not anymore. You are marked, and that is both privilege and poison. You curtsy, just slightly, enough to acknowledge him, and then you look away. That's the trick, isn't it? Let them chase the mystery, even if the mystery's tired, nervous, and hasn't eaten since breakfast. Even if you spent 2 hours earlier letting your maid pin your hair into spirals that make your scalp scream. You smile. You laugh at a joke you didn't hear. You keep moving. Later that night, you're summoned again. No letter. Just a man in livery, hat in hand, saying the king requests your presence. You follow, you don't ask where. He's in his private gallery tonight, the one not even the Queen visits, where the paintings are darker and the hall smells of old oil and wood polish. He walks with you in silence, stopping occasionally before a canvas to say something vague and profound. This one always felt like autumn, or he looks brave, doesn't he? You nod, say little. Let him fill the space with his own voice. He likes that, you've noticed. He's not looking for a rival, he's looking for reflection. Finally he turns, looks at you. Not your gown, not your hands, not the jewels around your throat, but you. He says your name, just your name, like he's testing it, turning it into something royal by sound alone. And then he smiles, not like a monarch, but like a man. And that's when you realise you're not just being watched, you're being wanted. He kisses you. It's slower than you expected. Gentle, even. There's no frenzy here, no conquering. Just warmth. When he pulls away, he's still looking at you, and for the first time, you see the weight he carries. Not just crowns and councils, but decades of duty, of expectation, of loneliness draped in gold. That night, you stay. In the morning, you wake to sunlight slicing through heavy drapes and the realization that something fundamental has changed. There is no going back to before, not socially, not emotionally, certainly not politically. You return to your own rooms before the palace fully wakes. Your maid meets you with a knowing look and an unspoken understanding. She bathes you without a word, but her hands are gentle. She knows the line you've crossed. So do you. By afternoon it's done. The rumours are everywhere. Whispers in corridors, sidelong glances in salons. A lady stumbles in your presence, spilling tea down her embroidered bodice. A man calls you your grace mockingly, then laughs like it was a joke. But there's no denying it anymore. You are now the royal mistress. Not officially, of course. Never officially. But unofficially, everyone knows, and that means your life has shifted. You now exist in a state of delicate power, strong enough to matter, weak enough to vanish. And you realise, standing there in that borrowed power, that you're both envied and condemned. But it's not just gossip you have to contend with. The Queen knows. She hasn't said anything, she never would. But you see it in the way her ladies are suddenly absent when you enter a room. You feel it in the silence that falls whenever her name is spoken near you. And though you haven't shared a word with her, you begin to feel the icy pressure of her presence, like a chandelier always hovering just a bit too low. Still, there are perks. A sapphire ring appears on your table one morning. No note, no occasion. It just exists, like it's always belonged to you. The next week, a small manor house outside the city is quietly deeded in your name. There's even a white mare, Arabian, the kind queens are supposed to ride, waiting in the stables with your initials braided into her bridle. These are the spoils, the unspoken contract, his affection, your silence, his presence, your loyalty. You become fluent in that language very quickly. You learn to accept without asking. You're given better rooms, not in the Queen's wing, obviously, but no longer near the outer corridors. You're closer now, too close for some. A duchess you once called friend now refuses to meet your eyes. A court painter stops mid-portrait and says your shoulders are too tense. You laugh, but inside you're aching, because the truth is you are tense, always. You never quite know where you stand. One night the king holds your hand under the table at a banquet, murmuring about a trip to the coast. The next day he cancels your visit entirely and spends the evening alone in the chapel. You begin to learn that affection here is not linear. It rises and dips like court music, pretty, unpredictable, and always performed for someone. Still, you hold on. You smile when he enters a room. You learn his habits, how he prefers rose water over lavender, how he hates quills with crooked nibs, how he bites his thumb when he's bored and fiddles with his ring when he's anxious. You become a connoisseur of his moods, and in doing so, you become essential. He begins to confide in you, quietly, carefully, late at night. Ministers he doesn't trust, treaties he's unsure of, factions in court that shift like sand. You say very little, but you nod at the right times. Once you suggest a replacement for a corrupt steward. A week later, the steward is gone. You begin to wonder, is this real influence, or just coincidence wearing a crown? Fact check. Many royal mistresses became unofficial advisors to their lovers. Madame de Pompadour attended royal council meetings and even vetted state appointments. Fringe note. Some mistresses wore a single jewelled hairpin to indicate when they'd been with the king. Palace gossip ran by sparkle code. Debated detail. Whether royal mistresses wielded true power or were mere emotional distractions continues to divide historians. Some say they ruled through love, others through illusion. You wake up one morning and there's a portraitist waiting for you. Not just any artist, the portraitist, the one who only paints royals and war heroes and the occasional pope. He stands stiffly in your drawing room, hat in hand, eyes flicking over your face like he's already sketching you in his head. Your maid offers tea. He declines. He wants light from the east-facing windows, a chair with no armrests, and a cushion exactly 3 inches thick. You don't argue. You simply sit and try not to let your lips twitch when he starts mumbling about symmetry and divine proportions. Being painted seems like an honour, a gift. But it's not. It's a test. You know exactly what this means. You're being documented, immortalised in oils and frame, yes, but also evaluated. The king wants you recorded in the official style, which means you've crossed into something else. You're not just his comfort anymore, you're part of his image. And once your face is committed to canvas, everyone will see it. The queen, the ministers, the world. The painter tells you to turn your head just so, and you obey. He adjusts a vase of roses in the background, not because they matter, but because they match your cheeks. You sit there for hours, spine stiff, lips soft, trying to balance humility and pride on the tip of your nose. You don't know which version of yourself he's painting, the real you or the one the king wants to see. After the sitting, you find a gift left on your dressing table, a pearl choker, elegantly knotted with a clasp shaped like a lion. Not from the king directly, but definitely from him. It's a message. You're mine. I want the world to know it. The next week, the portrait is unveiled at a small gathering in the royal apartments. Just a few trusted nobles, some clergy, and a cluster of art critics pretending not to gossip. The painting is beautiful. You look calm, slightly amused, like you know something no one else does. It doesn't look like you exactly. It looks like the best version of you, airbrushed by brushstroke and affection. The king smiles when he sees it, says nothing, just nods, satisfied. But the queen? She doesn't smile. She arrives late, trailing silence like a velvet train, and when she sees the portrait she tilts her head the tiniest bit, says it captures a certain freshness. Then she turns away, that's all. No words of outrage, no dramatic scenes. But it chills you deeper than a slap ever could. She has mastered the art of cruelty disguised as poise, and now that she's seen you, seen that version of you, you've crossed into her territory. Suddenly invitations start disappearing. Not from the king, of course, but from the ladies of the court. A dinner you were supposed to attend is postponed. A hunting party is full. You receive flowers from an anonymous sender, dead lilies wrapped in silk. You laugh it off in front of your maid, but later you bury them yourself in the rose garden, hands trembling. The king notices eventually. Not the dead flowers, but your shrinking presence. He asks why you weren't at the countess's musical evening. You shrug and say you weren't invited. He raises an eyebrow, says nothing, and the next day 3 invitations arrive at once, so pointedly that it's almost insulting. You go to all of them, of course. You wear green silk to one, black velvet to another, and diamonds borrowed from the royal vault to the last. You dance, laugh, play the role, and let them know you're not disappearing anytime soon. But beneath the lace and laughter, you're exhausted. The palace is starting to feel like a stage. Every room a scene, every word a script. You're watched from the moment you step out of bed to the moment your last candle is extinguished. Maids whisper. Courtiers smile too much. Even the guards glance a little longer now. One morning you find a letter under your breakfast plate. Not from the king. It's unsigned, written in an unfamiliar hand, but the message is crystal clear. He loved another before you. He'll love another after. Don't mistake your moment for a throne. You burn the letter without reading it a second time. Later that week the king surprises you. A private excursion to the countryside. Just the 2 of you and a small retinue. A picnic by the lake. A boat ride under the willows. You're dressed in linen instead of silk. Your hair loose. And for a few rare hours you forget that you're a symbol. You laugh genuinely. You let yourself fall asleep in the sun, his coat draped over your shoulders. When you return to court, everyone notices your glow, and the portrait, oh, the portrait, is suddenly everywhere. A miniature version appears on a snuff box. A larger copy is hung in the antechamber near the king's study. People start calling you La Belle, sometimes to your face, sometimes behind fans. It's not your title, not your name, but it's what sticks. In court, that's as good as gold. Still, not all the attention is flattering. The Queen's priest begins preaching more aggressively about morality. At one service, he speaks directly about temptation within the house of God's anointed. Everyone stares straight ahead, but you can feel their glances bouncing toward you like daggers. You sit taller, your expression unreadable, but your heart thuds like a drum. You start to wonder, how long can this last? The history of royal mistresses is one long game of musical chairs. You're sitting now, but the music always starts again. There's always someone younger, smarter, more ruthless. And the court loves a new scandal even more than an old favourite. You've seen it happen before, you will see it again. But for now, the king still calls for you. At night, you still feel his warmth beside you, his laughter, low and tired. After the world has gone to sleep, he tells you secrets no one else knows, about his fears, his dreams, his regrets, and you still listen. You still stay. Fact check. Royal mistresses were often painted by court artists as part of their semi-official role. Madame du Barry's portraits were displayed publicly, causing outrage. Fringe note. Some mistresses requested their portraits be painted with symbolic objects, like dogs for loyalty or open books for intelligence, to shape how they'd be remembered. Debated detail. Scholars continue to debate whether these portraits were tools of propaganda or genuine expressions of affection. Perhaps both, depending on the sitter. Dressing becomes strategy. Not taste, not preference, certainly not comfort. You rise each morning and step into battle armed with silk, satin and someone else's money. What colour says I'm favoured, but not arrogant? What neckline flatters but doesn't threaten? How much décolletage is too much for breakfast and too little for evening tea? You stop thinking of clothes as clothes. They're armour, they're messaging. Every stitch sewn by a seamstress who's sworn to secrecy, every ribbon and gemstone a calculated risk in the delicate campaign of court survival. Your dressing room transforms into a war room. Bolts of fabric line the shelves, some smuggled from Italy, others dyed in shades so rare they have names like Ashes of Scandal or Whispered Storm. Your maid becomes more than just a helper. She's your stylist, your confidant, your weather vane for public opinion. If she raises an eyebrow at a particular gown, you reconsider. If she hesitates while fastening a brooch, you ask why. And if she flat out says no to a pair of shoes, you burn them. She knows the gossip before it reaches your ears, and she's been lacing up courtiers since before you arrived. You've learned to trust her instincts more than your own. The king, of course, notices everything. He never says much, but you catch his gaze sliding across your shoulder, lingering at your waist, flicking up to meet your eyes with a small nod. Approval. Silent, soft, dangerous approval. The court watches him watching you, and that's where the real power begins to shimmer, beneath layers of ruffles and restraint. You're not just beautiful, you're strategic, and everyone knows it. One evening you wear a gown made entirely of midnight blue velvet, stitched with tiny seed pearls meant to look like stars. You walk into the salon, and conversation falters. The Queen is there, seated like a statue of composure. She doesn't look at you, but her wineglass is gripped a little tighter. One of her ladies, usually bold with her barbs, simply stares in stunned silence. You don't smile. You don't need to. You've already said everything with your hemline. But fashion, like favour, is fleeting. The court is fickle. What delights them today will bore them tomorrow. So you keep changing, reinventing. You embrace the French styles when the Spanish ones go cold. You adopt powdered wigs with subtle curls when the towering ones begin to topple under their own ridiculous height. One week, you wear sapphires. The next, you don't wear any jewellery at all, just to remind them that you can. That your power doesn't glitter. It radiates. Of course, not everyone is dazzled. Some sneer at your boldness, others whisper about your upstart sensibilities and provincial flair. One countess mutters that you dress like a courtesan, loud enough for you to hear. You turn, arch a brow, and respond with the kind of smile that's all teeth and no warmth. Better a courtesan, you say sweetly, than invisible. She flushes. The king laughs, and just like that she loses a few dinner invitations and you gain another pearl necklace. You begin to receive sketches from tailors you've never met, each desperate for your attention, your patronage, your influence. You pick your favourites, have your maid send back polite notes, and quietly cultivate a small empire of designers who owe you favours. When a duchess attempts to copy one of your gowns, the tailor warns you first. You arrive to the banquet in a completely different dress, one more daring, more elegant. And let her show up as yesterday's scandal. It's brutal, it's petty, it's glorious. But fashion isn't just about aesthetics anymore, it's politics. The king's decisions are often foreshadowed in your wardrobe. When he's negotiating with Venice, you wear Venetian lace. When he's courting the Pope's goodwill, you don a modest, nun-inspired ensemble that still manages to turn every head. Ministers begin analysing your sleeves like theologians dissecting scripture. Ambassadors watch your hats like omens. You smile and they sweat. Then one morning the Queen wears your colour. It's a subtle thing. A soft lavender you wore at last week's ball, now appearing on her bodice, carefully paired with a gold sash. Most wouldn't notice, but you do, and so do the others. It's a message, not submission, not mimicry. It's a shot fired in silk. She's telling the court that she can absorb your power, twist it into her own, that she's still the Queen, and no fashion war will change that. You don't respond right away. Let her think she's won. You spend a few days in muted greens and pale creams, just enough to give the impression you're retreating. Then, at the King's Spring Banquet, you appear in a gown so richly crimson it looks like spilled wine. The train is 12 feet long. The embroidery glints like firelight. And on your shoulder, pinned without apology, is a brooch shaped like a crown. You don't speak to the Queen that night. You don't need to. Your dress does all the talking. The King kisses your hand and murmurs something about how beautiful you look. You thank him, then turn so the entire court can see the ruby drops swinging from your ears. You've won this round, and they know it. Fact check. At the height of Versailles' opulence, fashion dictated not only status but political allegiance. Even the stitching on a mistress's gown could signal loyalty or rivalry. Fringe note. Some royal mistresses used fashion to communicate with lovers and spies. Embroidered symbols, hidden messages stitched into seams, or even a certain perfume only worn on secret meeting nights. Debated detail. While many believe court fashion was purely ornamental, historians now argue that it functioned as a silent language, an unspoken dialogue of alliances and ambitions. They don't greet you with daggers drawn. That would be too obvious. Instead, they welcome you with smiles that shine like polished brass, and compliments so thick they stick in your hair. Your skin glows lately, one murmurs, as if your glow came from peace and not pure adrenaline. Another touches your sleeve and says, "What a brave colour choice," which is court speak for I would never, but good for you. You're surrounded by women who smell like roses and arsenic. Some were mistresses once, others wanted to be. A few might still be, depending on who's pouring the wine. You smile, thank them, and sip your tea as if it hasn't been carefully laced with social poison. These women are courtiers' wives, duchesses, countesses, some with names older than the country itself. They walk with grace, but behind their fans are knives. Their loyalty is to their lineage, not their husbands, not the crown, and certainly not to you. To them, you are a disruption. A common girl reshaped in silk, lounging in rooms where birthright is supposed to be the key. They see your youth as arrogance, your beauty as theft. They see the king's affection and assume you stole it from someone worthier. You don't blame them. Not really, because you are a threat. Even if you never meant to be, even if your every step through the palace is careful, measured, humble, you are an infection to the order they've worked their whole lives to maintain. If the king favours you, what does that mean for them? If he whispers secrets in your ear, why would he listen to their husbands? You're a crack in the dam of aristocracy, and the water behind it is rising. And so they do what clever women have always done when power is slipping through their gloved fingers. They conspire. The first time it's something simple, a misdirected invitation to a royal recital. You arrive late, confused, and are ushered to the back, where your presence is noted and ridiculed. One lady pretends not to notice you standing. Another offers a seat seconds before the performance ends. You laugh it off, of course, but your cheeks burn all the same. The king isn't there. They knew he wouldn't be. That's the point. Next, your favourite seamstress is suddenly unavailable. You send a note. It goes unanswered. 2 days later, you hear she's been commissioned exclusively by the Queen's household. Another message. You are being watched. You're being squeezed. You turn to a new tailor, an Italian with scandalous ideas about hemlines, and commission something shocking just to remind them that you don't wilt, that you adapt. But you're learning quickly that court isn't just gowns and gossip, it's survival in silk gloves. At a masquerade, you're handed a drink, spiced wine, sweet and heady. You sip once, twice. Then something starts to swim behind your eyes. The candles seem to tilt. You're dizzy, suddenly, like your body isn't quite yours. Your maid notices before anyone else and rushes you out just in time. You spend the next morning retching and cold, wrapped in furs despite the heat. The palace physician shrugs. A passing illness, he says. But your maid finds the cup later, chipped on the rim with residue that smells faintly metallic. You keep that detail to yourself. No use accusing anyone, no proof, just whispers and suspicions, the kind that would get you laughed out of the room or conveniently reassigned to some estate far from the capital. You learn to smile through everything. To play dumb when someone asks if you've heard the latest rumour. You say, "No, do tell," and they whisper something about you and a footman in the stables. You pretend to be amused. You even ask what colour the footman's eyes were, since you can't quite remember. You're no longer just a mistress. You're a target. Still, not all the women hate you. Some are simply curious. One duchess, old enough to be your grandmother and cunning enough to rule the entire court if she wanted, invites you to tea. Just the two of you. Her sitting room is perfumed with jasmine and secrets. She serves cakes dusted with gold leaf and asks you, in a voice so kind it almost hurts, "Do you know what they did to the last one?" You do. You've heard bits of it. She was young too, favoured, briefly. "Poisoned?" you ask softly. "Oh no," the Duchess says. "That would be too merciful." Then she smiles and sips her tea, eyes never leaving yours. She was exiled, quietly, married off to some minor duke in the country. He had 12 children and gout. She died at 34 of boredom. You nod, say nothing, but inside you promise yourself, that will not be me. The king continues to see you. He doesn't speak of the court's shifting winds. He never asks about the whispered barbs or the way invitations seem to disappear before reaching your hand. He's wrapped in his own politics, his own battles, foreign negotiations, trade routes, a cousin making trouble in the north. You remain his comfort, his escape, not his concern. And you know better than to burden him with what he might call female troubles. So you adapt. You host your own salon, quiet, tasteful, and just influential enough to keep your enemies close. You invite artists, poets, thinkers, and just a handful of nobles whose favour you can still count on. It becomes the place to be seen, if not openly, then through polite excuse. They can pretend it's the music, the company, the gossip. But you know better. They come to see you, to judge you, to wonder how long you'll last. Longer than they'd like, that's for certain. Fact check. Court mistresses often formed rivalries with noblewomen, especially those connected to the Queen's circle. Their survival depended on alliances, secrecy, and constant reinvention. Fringe note. In some courts, women use scented gloves laced with irritants to subtly sabotage their rivals' appearances. Swollen fingers, rashes, the occasional fainting spell. Debated detail. Historians still disagree on how much the Queen's ladies-in-waiting interfered directly with mistresses, or if their efforts were more subtle forms of social warfare. There's a knock on your chamber door after midnight, 3 short raps, then silence. You're already awake, lying still under a canopy of brocade, staring at the flicker of candlelight against the ceiling. Your maid rushes to the door, eyes sleepy but alert. A servant stands outside with a message tucked into the folds of his coat. The king wants to see you. No reason given, no apology, just now. Quietly. You rise, let your maid dress you in something soft and quick to remove, because let's be honest, subtlety isn't part of this invitation. You pull a robe around your shoulders, glide through the palace's darker corridors, slippered feet silent against the rugs. You know the route by heart now. Past the tapestries that rustle slightly in the night breeze, through the old hallway lined with statues of the long dead, monarchs who stare blankly as if daring you to compare your life to theirs. You don't. Their crowns were public. Yours is hidden in sheets and suspicion. He greets you in his study, still dressed from the evening court. There's a fire burning low and a half-finished letter on his desk, its seal undone. He doesn't stand when you enter, just looks up, his face a mixture of exhaustion and something else you've come to recognize. Discomfort, maybe. Regret. He waves you in. "I couldn't sleep," he says, as if you're a cure for insomnia. Maybe you are. You sit beside him. He doesn't reach for you, just talks. He's tired. Tired of ministers bickering. Tired of treaties that fall apart. Tired of being watched. He stares into the fire like it might answer back. And then he says it, so softly you almost don't hear. "You're the only person here who doesn't ask me for anything." You don't correct him. You don't say that you do ask, just not with words. You ask with your presence, your silence, your willingness to be a living secret. Instead, you take his hand and let the moment stretch between you, warm and dangerous. Eventually he does pull you into his arms, and yes, you stay the night, but it's not always pleasure. You've figured that out by now. Behind the velvet curtains and soft sheets, there's strategy. Intimacy is part of the performance, and you're no longer an understudy, you're centre stage. You know when to speak, when to listen, when to lean in, and when to hold back. He doesn't just want affection, he wants to be understood. And if that understanding comes with a bare shoulder and a sigh against his throat, well, so be it. Sometimes the encounters are rushed. He comes to you between meetings, still carrying the scent of candle wax and court ink. Other times, he's tender, almost childlike, clinging to you as if your presence holds the kingdom together. But once, you see his rage. Not at you, never at you, but in the way he hurls a wine glass at the wall after a failed negotiation, in the way he paces, shouting about betrayal and incompetence. You sit quietly on the edge of the bed, letting his storm pass. And when he turns to you, eyes wild, you open your arms. He collapses into them. That night, you realize something important. You're not just a mistress. You're his mirror, his confessional, his reminder that beneath the robes and the crown and the absolute power, he's still just a man. And in that truth, you hold more sway than any minister could dream of. But there's a price. You wake up one morning to find a letter slipped under your door. Not from him. This one bears the seal of a noble house you've never interacted with. Inside, a thinly veiled threat. There are those who believe your influence is damaging to the stability of the kingdom. For everyone's sake, you should consider stepping back. You fold the letter calmly, set it aside, and smile through breakfast. Another time, your maid finds a small pouch tucked behind a tapestry in your dressing room. Inside, crushed glass. Not enough to kill, but enough to maim if stirred into face powder or slipped into a drink. You say nothing to the palace guards. You don't trust them. Instead, you slip the pouch into your drawer, next to the hidden notes and coded letters you've started collecting, because knowledge is currency, and you're building your fortune. You're not alone in the palace anymore. He's given you new servants, loyal ones, supposedly. But loyalty here is rented by favour and fear. One of them, a pale girl with nervous hands, cries in the hallway when she thinks no one's looking. Another pretends not to speak your language, though you hear her mutter to herself in perfect French when the trays are too heavy. You keep your secrets close. You keep your doors locked. And you never, ever drink anything you didn't see poured yourself. The king remains affectionate, maybe even more so now that the court is leaning harder against you. He calls you my solace. He brushes your hair back from your face like you're something soft and sacred. He commissions another portrait, this time a miniature, to keep with him when he travels. You let him think it's romantic. You don't remind him that every time he shows affection, your enemies grow bolder. One evening, you see a priest entering the Queen's private chapel. He doesn't look like one of the palace clergy. He's older, in travelling robes, with an accent that marks him as foreign. You don't ask questions, but the next day rumours stir. The Queen is fasting. The Queen is praying for the kingdom's moral restoration. The Queen is consulting with holy men. You know what that means. She's preparing for war, and not the kind with cannons. Fact check. Many royal mistresses lived in luxury but faced constant threats. Some were poisoned, others exiled, and a few quietly disappeared after offending the wrong person. Fringe note. Historical records suggest that some mistresses kept small survival kits, items like powdered opium, false letters, and hidden jewels, in case they had to flee in the night. Debated detail. It remains unclear how much kings shielded their mistresses from court dangers. Some may have protected them fiercely, others left them to fend for themselves. The necklace is heavy, even before you know what it means. You find it on your pillow one morning, a river of diamonds laced with gold so fine it almost shimmers like thread. You don't know who left it, but you don't need a note to guess. It's his way of saying something without saying it. Maybe an apology for how he ignored you during the royal procession yesterday. Maybe a reward for staying silent when you overheard the bishop mention your name in the same breath as indecency. Or maybe it's just a gift, for keeping quiet, for being beautiful, for not running. Whatever it is, the message is clear. You are being paid. That's how the court sees it too. Once you start accepting tokens like this, people stop seeing you as someone close to the king and start seeing you as someone owned by him. Your name is whispered like a price. She's wearing emeralds now, a countess sighs. That must be worth at least a duchy. You catch a baron's wife pointing out the new carriage you've been given. Glossy black wood, velvet seats, a coat of arms not quite your own. You're no longer a woman. You're a symbol, a favoured possession. And with possessions come expectations. The king begins including you in more of his private gatherings. Dinners with foreign ambassadors, musical performances in the garden, quiet meetings with a few close friends where maps are unrolled and small, polished pieces are moved around like war is a game of chess played on silk. You're not officially part of any council, of course, but your presence is tolerated, welcomed even, when you laugh at the right moments and know just when to leave the room. He starts asking your opinion more directly. What do you think of him? He'll ask after a viscount leaves the room. Or, should I trust this diplomat's promises? Sometimes it's small talk, meaningless flattery. But other times, you realise your words ripple outward. You suggest a general seems too eager for war, and within a month he's quietly reassigned. You mention how dull a certain noblewoman has become, and suddenly her invitation to court is regretfully delayed. You're not ruling, not really, but you're pressing your thumb lightly on the scale. You're rewarded, of course, with jewels, yes, but also with land. One morning you're informed that you now own a small estate near the coast, a villa with lemon trees and white curtains that billow like sails. You've never even seen it, but already the idea of it soothes you. Somewhere to escape, somewhere no one knows your name, somewhere that might one day save you, if you ever need saving. You start keeping a chest at the foot of your bed, locked, and only you have the key. Inside, a few letters, some documents bearing the king's seal and the deed to that estate. Also, a handful of rings and a pouch of coins, just enough to disappear if necessary. You tell no one, not even your maid, not even him. Because as much as he adores you, you've seen how quickly adoration can sour when politics sour with it. But for now, he's still generous, still smiling when you enter a room, still reaching for your hand under the table. He's started calling you my lady, even in front of others. The phrase hangs in the air with the weight of a promise, but without the ring to back it up. Some people take it as a joke. Others take it as an insult to the Queen. You take it as something far more dangerous, a title without the protection. The court reacts exactly as you expect. The pamphlets begin showing up, cheap, little sheets sold in the market, passed hand to hand, anonymous and cruel. You appear in poems now, satirical songs sung by drunk courtiers with too much time and too little wit. One compares you to Helen of Troy, if Helen had sold her honour for a necklace. Another suggests you've cast a spell, enslaved the king, and bewitched the entire kingdom. You collect them, not out of vanity, but out of necessity. You want to know what people are saying, because what starts as gossip can turn to law if enough powerful people repeat it. Your maid reads one aloud while brushing your hair. She chuckles and says, "At least they didn't get your nose right." You smile. But your eyes stay locked on the mirror, because they got enough of it right to hurt. It doesn't help that the gifts keep arriving. A harp, a fur-lined cloak from the northern provinces, an oil painting of you with the face slightly idealised, cheeks a bit fuller, lips a bit redder. It's sent to your villa. You wonder how long before the Queen sends a letter to her agents. The two of you haven't spoken in weeks, but you feel her presence, cold and sharp in every corridor, in the sudden chill when you enter a room, in the way certain servants avert their gaze when they pass. You've become a storm cloud in silk. The king doesn't see it, or pretends not to. He's delighted by your new status, tells you stories of other famous mistresses in history. One ruled a king's treasury, one helped negotiate peace with Austria. He talks about your potential like it's a garden you can just walk into and start planting. You nod, you smile, but you've learned to be cautious. You know that roses come with thorns, and every privilege he gives you sharpens the knives behind your back. Still, you're not ungrateful. Some nights, he reads to you, just a few pages from some ancient epic he claims to love. Other nights, you play cards, drink wine, and let yourselves pretend that nothing outside the chamber exists. You lie in bed, the moonlight painting the floor, and wonder if this is happiness, or at least the closest someone like you can get to it. Fact check. Royal mistresses were often granted property, titles, and enormous gifts, but rarely with full security. Their fortunes could vanish with a single royal whim. Fringe note. In some courts, women were banned from accepting gifts larger than a certain value unless publicly declared, to curb the quiet rise of unofficial favourites. Debated detail. Some argue these lavish gifts were a sign of genuine affection, while others insist they were transactional payments meant to keep mistresses quiet and compliant. The painter returns weeks later, unannounced. You're in the middle of dressing when your maid pokes her head in and says flatly, "He's back, the one with the 2 big brushes and 2 small patients." You smirk and tighten your robe, wondering which version of you he's come to capture this time. The first portrait hangs in a salon now, officially a gift from the king. But everyone knows it's something more, a declaration framed in gold leaf. Now there's talk of a second, smaller piece, something more intimate. A portrait meant not for the public, but for posterity, or perhaps for the private desk drawer of the most powerful man in the kingdom. The artist greets you with his usual cool professionalism, eyes flicking over your face with the same calculating stare you now reserve for foreign dignitaries and veiled threats. "You've changed," he says, not kindly, not unkindly, just plainly. And he's not wrong. The softness in your cheeks has given way to angles. Your eyes are sharper, not just in shape, but in understanding. You've learned how to hold your expression just so, gentle, accessible, but unreadable. You sit as he instructs, one shoulder bare, your hair pinned up to suggest ease and elegance all at once. He paints in silence, and you let your mind drift. You think about the weight of permanence, about how strange it is to sit still while someone decides how the world will remember your face. Because that's what portraits do, isn't it? They lie, or at least, they edit. This version of you, the one with flawless skin and demure posture, will outlive you. She'll be studied, hung in halls, perhaps misnamed one day by historians who squint at her in dusty museums and call her companion, or paramour, or footnote. No one will paint the way your hands shook after the priest's sermon last Sunday, or how you stood behind a column to avoid the Queen's eyes, or how, alone in your rooms, you've begun writing your thoughts into a small leather journal and hiding it behind a panel in your wardrobe, just in case, just so some part of the truth survives you. The portrait finishes in 3 sittings. It's beautiful. Of course it is. This painter doesn't make women, he makes myths. In this version, you're all serenity and grace, the tilt of your mouth suggesting secrets too polite to name. The king sees it and grins, pleased with how well his taste has been rendered. He jokes that the painting makes him look even luckier than he is. You smile, and in that moment, you're more mask than woman. Shortly after the unveiling, a rumour starts that a similar portrait of the Queen is being quietly commissioned. One with fuller colour, stiffer posture, more modest attire. A direct answer. Not a competition, of course. Never that. Just balance. You hear about it from a servant who heard it from a scribe who supposedly glimpsed a sketch in the artist's portfolio. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence. You realise then that your likeness has become part of a political equation. Your face, your posture, your expression, they're weapons now, and you didn't even get to choose the battlefield. A few weeks later, your miniature portrait is presented to the king as a gift. He wears it around his neck for a few days before tucking it away into one of his many lacquered boxes. You don't ask where it goes after that. You've learned not to ask too many questions about the things he hides. Not long after, you're invited to walk the gallery with the king, a rare public gesture. The corridors are long, lined with paintings of ancestors who look either bored or furious. You pass portraits of battle scenes, of weddings arranged centuries ago, of mistresses long dead and mostly forgotten. You pause before one of them, a woman with powdered hair and downcast eyes. She's been painted in mourning black, her hands folded in prayer, but the expression is unmistakable. Not sorrow, survival. The king sees you watching it and chuckles. She was my grandfather's mistress, caused more trouble than most generals, nearly bankrupted the navy trying to impress her. You smile. What happened to her? He shrugs. Married off, sent to Spain, died young. You nod, and the conversation drifts. But that night you stay up long past the last candle, staring at the ceiling, that painted face etched behind your eyelids. You wonder if anyone cried when she left, if anyone warned her before the tide turned, if she too had packed a chest full of escape routes and buried letters. You receive a request to sit for yet another painting, this one from a foreign diplomat who has taken a great interest in the refined culture of this court. You decline, politely, then firmly. You know what he's after, not beauty, not art, proof, a souvenir to carry home, to whisper about in foreign courts. Here she is, the mistress who turned our negotiations into puddles. You're not giving them that. Instead, you write a brief note thanking the diplomat for his interest and suggesting he admire your earlier portrait in the king's salon. You sign it with a slight flourish, the same one you've been practicing, the one that almost looks like royalty if you squint. It's petty. It's perfect. Still, the attention doesn't stop. One day, you find a sketch tucked beneath your door. Not official, not even signed. Just pencil on thick paper, a simple drawing of your face in profile, eyes closed. It's startlingly honest. No jewels, no pose, no artifice. Just you, as you really are. You turn it over, but there's nothing written. No clue who left it. For a moment your mask slips. You stare at the lines and you almost forget how tightly the court holds you. You hide the sketch behind your wardrobe mirror next to the journal. It's a version of you no one else gets to see. Fact check. Portraits of royal mistresses were often used as political tools, carefully curated to emphasize elegance, virtue, or seduction, depending on what image the court wished to present. Fringe note, some mistresses had miniature portraits painted with secret compartments, tiny cavities behind the canvas used to hide love notes or coded messages. Debated detail. Historians debate whether the rise of portraiture empowered women by immortalizing them or reduced them to curated symbols of political theatre. It's official now. Everyone knows. Not just the ministers or the noble families or the ladies pretending not to loathe you. Everyone. The market stalls are humming with your name, whispered like incense smoke drifting through every level of the city. The baker's apprentice has a joke about your perfume. A street performer mimes your walk in front of a painted throne. In the lower taverns, your name is rhymed with words that would make a priest faint. And every version of you is just a little wrong, twisted for entertainment, outrage, or envy. The people don't see you as a woman. They see you as a scandal with a pretty face. It begins, strangely, with a cake. Your likeness, marzipanned and delicate, appears in a baker's window one morning. Your famous velvet gown recreated in sugar, the pearls on your neck made of candied almonds. It's meant as flattery, clearly. The baker claims it's a tribute to beauty and grace. But by afternoon, the rumours are boiling. She's edible now, someone cackles outside the palace gates. Sweet and gone by sunset. A pamphlet follows, printed cheap and fast, calling you the Queen of Frosting, suggesting the king would marry you if you weren't so easily devoured. The palace tries to ignore it. You try to ignore it. But you can't pretend forever. The city watches you now. Your carriage is followed by stares, your name muttered as you pass. Vendors call out your favourite fruit, hoping for a sale. A jeweller starts selling copies of your necklace, the Royal Darling's Garland. Some say the pieces are enchanted. Others say they curse your chances of marriage. And then there's the pamphlet that crosses a line. Printed anonymously, circulated in plain brown covers. It's a fiction. Except, of course, that it isn't. It describes a character unmistakably modelled after you. Her background, her clothing, her laugh. In the story, she seduces a king, ruins a general, and dies choking on gold. It's scandalous. It's cruel. It's being read aloud in salons and behind closed curtains. Someone sends a copy to your rooms. No note, no signature, just the message. This is how they see you now. You don't cry, you take it, fold it, and place it in your hidden drawer. It joins the others, letters, sketches, that lockbox of truths you can't share. The king, when told, is outraged, but only for a moment. He says it will pass, that these things always do. He offers you a new necklace, even more extravagant, as if jewels can drown public opinion. You accept it because you must. But in your chest, something hardens. The Queen, meanwhile, says nothing. She walks through the palace with her head high, her gloves buttoned tightly. Her silence is so precise it becomes its own form of violence, but her ladies do the work for her. The people's darling, one murmurs as you pass. How thrilling, to be adored by butchers and thieves. You smile, nod, say nothing. You've learned how not to flinch. Your maid begins bringing you market gossip. She thinks it's funny, at first. They're making dolls now, she tells you one morning, holding up a crude wooden figure with your likeness carved into it. Dress them up, sell them for $1. Look, this one's got the mole on the wrong side. You laugh lightly, because that's what you're supposed to do. But your stomach turns, because dolls can be sold, dolls can be broken, dolls can be burned. You hear whispers of something worse, more than gossip, less than threat. That a crowd gathered outside the palace gates yesterday, shouting your name, not with cheers but with jeers. That someone threw a pig's heart at the wall claiming it was yours. That your name was scratched onto the door of a noble chapel with the word witch scrawled beneath it. That's when the king starts sending extra guards. Not openly, just more men in your corridor, new faces in the shadows. You ask no questions, you just walk faster. And yet, somehow, there are still those who admire you. Little girls wave when your carriage rolls by. One tosses you a flower and curtsies like she's practiced it every morning in front of a mirror. You keep that flower pressed in a book. Somewhere, people write songs about your eyes. Somewhere, a tailor has stitched an entire dress collection in your signature shade of rose. You exist now in a strange duality, loved and loathed, worshipped and mocked, a spectacle in a corset, and still the king wants you near. He calls you his anchor, his comfort, tells you not to worry. But even he can't control the tide of public opinion. Ministers grow restless. Some begin murmuring that your presence is weakening the crown's moral image. That decency is the spine of the monarchy, and you, unfortunately, are not part of that bone structure. The king assures you they're jealous, and they are, but that doesn't mean they're wrong. One afternoon, you overhear two ladies speaking in the gallery. They don't know you're there. They're talking about you, of course. One sighs and says, "She thinks she's untouchable. She'll see. They always fall hardest when they've flown too close to the sun." You step away before they see you. You smile all the way down the corridor back into your room where the curtains are drawn and the walls are quiet. You sit down, open your journal, and write. The people love stories. They always have. But they love endings more than beginnings. One day they will get their ending. But it won't be the one they expect. Fact check. Some royal mistresses became wildly famous among the public. Madame du Barry and Nell Gwyn were adored by commoners, though often mocked in print and art. Fringe note. Broadsheets and street plays often exaggerated mistresses' lives, portraying them as witches, goddesses, or both, depending on the political mood. Debated detail. Scholars still argue whether royal mistresses' public popularity helped protect them, or made them even more vulnerable to scandal and downfall. The invitations arrive on thick vellum, edges gilded, ink dark as blood. They're from ministers, dukes, generals' wives, names you've come to memorise not from admiration but from caution. At first you think they must be mistakes. Why would they want you at their salons, their soirees, their card tables? But no, the names are right. The handwriting is careful, and each invitation bears the same strange chill, like a hand extended in welcome with a knife just under the cuff. You attend, of course. You can't afford not to. The first is a dinner hosted by Lady Therese, a marquess's wife with opinions sharper than her lace. She greets you with a smile that barely touches her eyes, and places you 2 seats from the head of the table, close enough to be noticed, far enough to be dismissed. The meal is delicate, cold soups, roasted quail, little slices of pickled something or other. Everyone speaks in riddles. One nobleman tells a story about a poor girl from nowhere who charmed a king and lost her head. Everyone laughs. You do too. Then there's the game. Some kind of intellectual parlour game meant to expose one's wit, or lack thereof. You're paired with a viscount whose eyes flicker to your cleavage more than once. The question is about loyalty. What does it mean truly, someone asks, to serve a king? The answers are layered, theatrical. One woman suggests it means surrender. A man says loyalty is about sacrifice. You say nothing. You know better than to explain yourself to a table that's already decided what role you play. The king finds it all terribly amusing. When you tell him about the game, he chuckles and says, "They're trying to bait you." He touches your chin gently and adds, "They wouldn't bother if you weren't dangerous." You smile, kiss his hand. But inside, the unease deepens. You're being invited not to be welcomed, but to be watched. They want to study you up close, maybe find a crack in the porcelain. Still, you keep attending. At another gathering, a minister's wife asks you what you would do if you were queen. She says it sweetly, like it's a joke, but everyone hears the sharpness under the sugar. You reply, "I wouldn't want the crown. It ruins every outfit." Laughter follows, and for a moment you win. But later, when you're alone in the corridor fetching your shawl, a hand grabs your arm. It's the same woman. Her smile is gone. "Enjoy your moment," she whispers. "They don't last." And that's the truth no one bothers to disguise anymore. Your moment is now, and everyone else is just waiting to see how it ends. Even the Queen. You finally meet her, not a passing glance or a formal bow at court, but a conversation, or rather, a measured exchange of sentences so polite they feel like being flayed with silk. It happens at a charitable banquet, one of those events that looks benevolent on the surface, but is really just a social chessboard draped in floral arrangements. You've been placed strategically near her, too close to claim coincidence, too far to pretend familiarity. She turns to you. Her voice is calm, clear. "You're fond of roses, I hear." You nod. "Especially the ones that bloom late. They last longer." A faint lift of her eyebrow. "Some flowers bloom quickly too, almost impatiently." You smile. "And some thorns are quite decorative." That's the entire conversation. 20 seconds, but the air around you changes. Everyone notices. The room suddenly has less oxygen in it. You both go back to your meals and the servers resume their silent ballet. But it's done now. The line has been drawn. You spoke to the Queen, and she spoke back. Afterward, the king is quiet. Not angry, not pleased, just thoughtful. He doesn't mention the exchange, but he holds your hand a little tighter that night. He pours you more wine. He kisses your forehead and says, "You're not like the others." You wish you believed him, because you know there were others. Before you, after you, maybe even now. Whispers about a noblewoman in the countryside he once wrote to. Rumours of a singer whose voice he finds relaxing. He denies it, of course, and maybe it's not true, maybe it is, but either way you're learning. His affection is genuine, but it is not exclusive. The court plays on. There are new faces now, younger women, prettier perhaps, certainly bolder. They watch you with a strange blend of awe and calculation. One offers to lend you a shawl when yours slips, another compliments your handwriting. You thank them, smile, and then make a note of their names. Because you remember what it felt like to be them. To look at the woman who held his attention and wonder how. And how long. Your maid begins to warn you gently. "That one," she says, nodding toward a count's daughter, practices her curtsy outside your chambers. Another time, she tells you that a letter meant for the king passed through 3 other women's hands before reaching his desk. You feel it like a shift in the wind, a storm gathering, not overhead, but far off. Still time to run, still time to prepare, but not forever. You start writing more in your journal, longer entries, not just thoughts, but accounts. Who spoke to whom? What was said? Which servants linger too long? You hide it better now, beneath the false bottom of your glove drawer. You don't write every night, just enough to keep a record, just in case. Because if there's one thing you've learned, it's this. The court forgets nothing, but it also remembers whatever it finds most convenient. Fact check. It was common for royal mistresses to be placed near queens at events to test the appearance of unity or to stage subtle displays of dominance through etiquette. Fringe note, some mistresses documented their entire time at court in secret journals, which were only discovered centuries later, written in codes, metaphors, or false names. Debated detail. Historians still question whether queens truly feared their husbands' mistresses, or tolerated them as a calculated part of court life, with boundaries never publicly crossed. It happens quietly, as these things always do. A missed cycle, a flutter in your belly, a sudden aversion to wine, signs you would have dismissed in any other life, in any other place. But here, in the royal palace, where every shift of your breath is watched and every glance weighs more than gold, the signs mean one thing and one thing only: you might be pregnant. You say nothing at first. Not to your maid, not to the king, not even to yourself. You sit a little longer in the mornings. You eat more cautiously. You count the days with a mental chalkboard, erasing and re-adding numbers, trying to find another explanation. But after 3 weeks, you stop pretending. This isn't nerves or poor digestion. Something inside you is shifting, growing. And it doesn't feel like just a physical change. It feels like a fuse has been lit, burning slowly toward a very public explosion. When you finally tell your maid, she drops the brush she's holding. It clatters against the floor, and for a long moment neither of you moves. Then she whispers, "Are you sure?" You nod. She doesn't ask how. She just begins to move, efficiently and silently, like someone trained for this exact moment. Clean linens, a quieter physician. No herbs from the usual apothecary. Everything must be subtle, untraceable. You haven't even told him yet. You wait 4 more days. Then, one night, in the stillness of his study, when his mood is soft and his voice slower than usual, you finally say it. Just a whisper, barely more than breath. "I think I may be carrying your child." He looks at you for a long time, the way someone might study a crack in a vase that's still holding water. He doesn't speak. You think, maybe this was a mistake. But then, slowly, he reaches for your hand. "You're sure?" he asks, and when you nod, his expression changes. It's not exactly joy. It's more complicated. Relief, worry, pride, fear, all knotted together behind his eyes. "No one else knows?" he asks. You shake your head. "Good," he says. "It must stay that way, for now." And just like that, it becomes a secret war. The king becomes more attentive, protective even. He visits you more often, but always under pretense, sends more guards, has your food tested before you eat. Your maid becomes your shadow, never more than a step behind. And yet, despite all the precautions, you feel a target tightening around you. Because a royal child, even an unofficial one, is a political earthquake. And the court thrives on tectonic instability. Word spreads, as it always does, not officially, no proclamation. Just a change in how people look at you. A lingering glance at your waistline. A whispered, "She's glowing." A few too many pastries delivered for your cravings. You see it in the Queen's expression. A subtle tightening at the corners of her mouth, like she's already calculating the implications. You've crossed another boundary, and this one can't be undone. You try to maintain normalcy. You still attend dinners, though the food tastes like cotton. You still walk the gardens, though the sun feels harsher now. You're more careful with the marble steps, the cold floors, the too tight corsets. Your dresses are altered ever so slightly. No one comments, but they all notice. The king arranges for a physician to visit you privately, a man with soft hands and a pinched mouth who nods after a brief examination and confirms what you already knew. You are with child. The king is pleased, quietly but unmistakably. He talks of the future in abstract terms. "A country needs heirs," he says once, not meeting your eyes. "Many great men were born of unusual circumstances." You ask him nothing, because you've learned that hope, in your position, is a currency best hoarded, not spent. Then comes the petition. From the bishop himself, a note, handwritten, folded and sealed, delivered directly to the king. You're not supposed to see it, but your maid hears enough while passing the door to know its contents. A formal request for the king to distance himself from immoral distractions. A plea to protect the integrity of the crown. It never names you. It doesn't have to. The king burns it in the fireplace silently. But the queen has her answer too. At the next public event she appears in full regalia, crown, jewels, the works. She hasn't worn them in months. She hasn't needed to, but tonight she does. And she wears white, the colour of queens, of virtue, of godly favour. You watch from a private balcony, uninvited, unseen, and you realise she is staking her claim. You may carry his child, but she carries his crown. That night your maid tells you that the kitchen staff has been instructed to avoid using rosemary in your meals. You ask why. "Old superstition," she shrugs. "Rosemary for remembrance, and someone wants you forgotten." You begin to write more. Your journal becomes a lifeline, filled now with entries not just of court intrigue, but of what you feel, the flutter in your stomach, the fear that you'll be pushed down a staircase, the hope that maybe, just maybe, you'll hold this child in your arms and see something of yourself live on. You don't know if it's a boy or girl, you don't care, you just want it safe, but safety is not something the palace offers easily. One evening your maid finds a vial under your pillow, clear liquid sealed tight, no note, no explanation. She hands it to you, lips tight. You don't open it. You don't have to. It's a message, one you understand perfectly. Someone wants a choice in the matter, you smash it against the hearth, and you write in your journal, "This child is not a scandal. This child is mine." Fact check. Some royal mistresses did bear children to kings, though those children were rarely acknowledged unless politically advantageous. Legitimacy remained at the monarch's whim. Fringe note. In certain palaces, superstition held that mistresses who became pregnant brought both good fortune and curses to the kingdom, depending on how they carried. Debated detail. Historians debate whether queens often knew about royal bastards in advance, and if they quietly permitted them as a necessary evil of dynastic politics. It starts with a smile. Not yours, the queen's. The first time you see it, truly see it, is at a winter court function, all white marble and icy chandeliers, the kind of night where your breath fogs the glass and your fingers stiffen against the stem of your wine glass. She arrives late, as she always does now, making silence part for her like a knife through silk. Her gown is silver threaded with blue, embroidered so finely it seems to ripple when she walks. Every head turns, including yours, and then she smiles. Not at you. No, of course not. But near you, past you, at a noble's daughter who says something harmless. But the smile, it slices. It's the kind of expression that's rehearsed, as sharp as glass and twice as cold. That smile says everything she hasn't said aloud since your name became the most whispered syllable in the palace. And in that moment, you realise that whatever war you thought you were fighting has already entered its next phase. She's not ignoring you anymore, she's noticed you, and she's done pretending you don't matter. You find yourself walking differently after that, sitting differently, speaking more carefully, listening twice as hard. Because you're no longer just a mistress in her shadow, you're a rival inside her house. And she, despite her calm demeanour and polished grace, has the weight of centuries behind her. Her crown is not made of flowers and favour, it's made of bloodlines. And unlike you, she can afford to wait. Days pass, then weeks. The court begins to shift around you. Subtle things. You notice one of your servants has been reassigned. Unexpected transfer, they say. Another admits, eyes downcast, that your gowns now arrive with tiny errors. Hems off by a fraction, stitching not quite secure. And then there's the window. One morning, you rise to find the glass cracked in your bedroom. A small clean split from top to bottom. No one knows how it happened. You do. Because these aren't accidents. They're messages. The Queen's smile has fingers. At court she begins to speak more often, always formally, always beautifully. But when she talks about the virtues of patience, everyone glances toward you. When she discusses devotion, in the face of temptation, the ministers nod solemnly. She never names you, she doesn't have to. Her sermons are gilded arrows, and she is an archer trained by centuries of royal precedent. One afternoon, you receive an invitation. Not a summons, not a command, an invitation. Her Majesty requests your presence for tea. You sit staring at the card for a long time. It feels absurd, doesn't it? Tea. As if this were a polite rivalry over garden seating, and not a balancing act on the edge of ruin. But you say yes, because refusing would be worse, because curiosity is a siren's call, and because deep down you need to know what she wants. You dress with precision, not your finest gown, not your softest. Something dignified, respectful, modest, but not meek. Your maid knots your hair higher than usual, and your earrings are pearls. No diamonds, no emeralds, nothing that hints at being kept. When you arrive, the Queen is already seated, her back straight, her posture perfect, her expression unreadable. "Please," she says, gesturing to the chair across from her, "I do hope you take honey." You sit. The first 10 minutes are about nothing. Tea, the weather, The peacocks in the lower gardens. It's theatre, of course, and both of you know it. Finally, as she lifts her cup to her lips, she glances at your midsection. Just for a moment. No words, no accusations. Just that one flick of her eyes as if to say, so it's true. You don't move. She sets her cup down. I wonder, she says quietly, how difficult it must be to live with so many people wishing you gone. You smile. It depends on the day. Do you ever fear it? She asks. Her voice is gentle, kind even. You hesitate. No, I fear being forgotten more. She doesn't smile, but her eyes sharpen, just a bit. Then you understand, she says, what I must protect. And there it is, the real conversation, the truth beneath the porcelain and petals. You're not just an inconvenience to her, you're a threat to the thing she was raised to preserve, an ancient house, a public image, a monarchy wrapped in silk and tradition. You, with your laughter and your lover's eyes and your illegitimate swelling belly, are a fault line. I didn't choose this, you say softly, truthfully. The Queen studies you. Neither did I, she replies. And for 1 second, one full strange heartbeat, you understand each other. The rest of the tea is silence. When you rise to leave, she doesn't offer her hand. You curtsy. She nods. Nothing more. But later that night you find a package in your chambers, a blanket. Soft, hand-stitched, clearly made for a child. No note. You sit staring at it for an hour before you finally fold it up and place it in the chest by your bed. A week later, you feel the first true movement. Just a flutter, like butterfly wings against your ribs. You gasp, hand pressed to your stomach, suddenly rooted in place, for all the opulence, the danger, the politics and poison. This moment is the most real thing you've felt in months. You write it down in your journal. I felt life. I felt it. Despite everything, this child is coming. This child is real. And then, just below that you write, the Queen knows. She's not angry. She's preparing. Fact check. There are documented instances of queens and royal mistresses engaging in staged civility to maintain public peace, particularly in times of pregnancy or scandal. Fringe note. Some royal households had secret codes for staff to signal when mistresses and queens crossed paths. Flower arrangements, bell patterns, or sudden music changes. Debated detail. Some historians believe certain queens formed quiet alliances with mistresses to protect dynastic lines, while others insist the rivalries were far more bitter and personal. The scandal breaks with the subtlety of a musket blast. It begins, as these things so often do, with paper. A single page, badly printed, ink already smudging at the corners, delivered to the palace kitchens at dawn, tucked into the apron of a baker's assistant who doesn't even know she's carrying revolution in her pocket. The headline screams across the top in jagged type, "The whore's heir, the crown's rotten seed." By mid-morning it's everywhere. Not officially, of course. No one hands you a copy. But you see it in the servants' tight mouths, in the way your guard won't meet your eye. In the silence at breakfast, where even your maid fumbles the cutlery. It arrives in whispers first, then in looks. Then, later that evening, the king himself enters your chambers with a crumpled version of it in his hand, his face somewhere between fury and exhaustion. He doesn't speak at first, just tosses the pamphlet onto the table, where it flutters like a wounded bird. You read the headline, then the first paragraph. Your name, thinly veiled under a false one, is repeated 5 times in 6 sentences. It suggests everything, that your pregnancy is a lie, that the child is someone else's, that you've bewitched the king and intend to replace the legitimate royal line. The phrases are cruel, theatrical. There's even a crude drawing. You laugh, once, softly in disbelief. He doesn't. "They crossed a line," he mutters. You want to say they crossed it months ago, but you don't. You watch him pace instead, one hand in his hair, the other curled into a trembling fist. He's used to pamphlets. But not like this. This one's different. It didn't come from some drunken poet or second-hand gossip monger. This has the stench of purpose, of funding, a campaign, not a prank. And you both know where that trail likely leads. "The council wants an inquiry," he says. "They want reassurance." You swallow hard. "What kind of reassurance?" He doesn't answer. That night a physician is sent to examine you again. Not the soft-spoken one from before. This one's new, appointed by the Queen's personal household. He's brisk, cold, overly formal. He asks questions that make you clench your fists under the blanket. Your maid hovers nearby, pretending to busy herself with towels, but her eyes are locked on the physician's every move. The examination ends in silence. He nods, says you are indeed pregnant, that it appears normal, healthy, that there's no evidence of deception. He doesn't meet your gaze once. The next day, a new article circulates, this one more polished, less vulgar, published by a respected paper under the guise of analysis. It calls for transparency. It uses phrases like the dignity of the throne and the dangerous influence of emotional entanglements. It suggests that while you may not be lying, your presence poses a risk to the monarchy's moral stability. The court rallies fast. Some pretend sympathy, but their eyes are calculating. A few defenders emerge. Women who see in you their own exile, men who've benefited from your rise and now feel tethered to your fate. But they are few and quiet, because no one wants to be caught holding the wrong end of a scandal when it ignites. The Queen makes no statement. She doesn't need to. She attends church 3 times that week, donates a new altar cloth to the cathedral, sponsors a school for girls. Her public image gleams like a polished coin while yours is passed from hand to hand in dirty ink and soiled verses. She smiles, she waits, and she lets the court do what it does best, implode around the scent of blood. You receive 3 anonymous letters. The first is from someone claiming to be a friend at court. It urges you to flee while you still can. There is a place for you at my cousin's estate, quiet, safe. He owes me a favour. You'll be protected. The second is less kind. You will not be remembered, but your shame will be. The third simply says, he's already choosing the next. That one makes your hands go cold, because whether it's true or not doesn't matter. The seed is planted, and in the hothouse of the palace, rumours bloom faster than roses. The king tries to shield you. He increases your guard, begins spending more time in your rooms, sometimes sleeping there for hours in the middle of the day, arms thrown over his eyes like he's trying to unsee his responsibilities. He whispers that he'll fix it, that it's just a passing storm, but you can see the tightness around his mouth, the darkening circles beneath his eyes. You ask him once if he regrets any of it. He doesn't answer, not with words. Instead, he takes your hand and kisses it, then your wrist, then your stomach, and for a moment, it's just you and him and the soft thud of a child not yet born, pulsing like a secret between your ribs. But the world presses in. The ministers request a formal audience. They say they support him, of course, that they understand, but they suggest that prudence is key, that the public's faith in the monarchy must be restored, that certain individuals might be more helpful to the crown from a more discreet distance. He says no. He says it firmly. But you hear the echo in his voice. You ask him again, later, if he regrets it. This time he just closes his eyes. You begin preparing, not visibly, not dramatically, but quietly. You move the journal from your drawer to a satchel. You have your maid gather a few simple dresses and tuck them into a travelling chest under the bed. You order new boots, ones better suited to walking. You inspect the villa's deed again, trace your finger along the shoreline marked in ink. Because you love him. But you also know him, and men raised with power tend to clutch it harder than they hold people. One morning you wake to find a new pamphlet on your pillow, not left by your maid, not part of your reading pile. It's folded, creased like it's been handled many times. This one isn't about you, it's about the child. It includes a family tree with a crooked scrawled branch at the bottom marked unblessed. You don't scream, you just pick it up, tear it slowly and drop the pieces into the fire, then you write in your journal. They do not fear me, they fear what comes after me. Fact check. Political pamphlets were frequently used in royal courts to shape public opinion and discredit rivals. Some historians call them the tabloids of their day. Fringe note. Certain pamphleteers were secretly paid by royal factions, including queens' households, to wage moral wars under the guise of public outrage. Debated detail. It's still unclear how much monarchs knew about these smear campaigns, and whether their silence was complicity or helplessness in the face of palace politics. You're sitting in the orangery when the prince finds you. Not the king, his son, the heir, the one everyone watches with stiff smiles and polite dread. He's young, technically, though not as young as he acts. Handsome in that practised way of people raised on compliments. His jaws a little too square, his hair always too perfectly curled. He walks like he knows he's important but doesn't quite understand why. That's the danger of heirs. They've done nothing, but everything waits for them. You've seen him before, of course. He's nodded to you in passing, offered the occasional stiff mademoiselle. He's rarely spoken directly, and when he has, it's been carefully public, buffered by courtiers and etiquette and the distance owed to a mistress. But today, he comes alone. You look up, startled. You weren't expecting anyone. Not today, not here. The orangery is your escape, the one place in the palace where the air feels warm and the scent of soil drowns out the stench of politics. The prince doesn't belong here. And yet here he is, standing in the doorway, eyes flicking over the citrus trees, the sunlight caught in the glass. "May I sit?" he asks. You nod. Of course he may. He doesn't wait for a response before settling into the wrought iron chair across from you. He wears riding boots, no gloves. His cheeks are flushed from the cold, and there's something sharp in his gaze today. Less lazy, more curious. "You read," he says, gesturing to the open book in your lap. "I always imagined you did. The way you listen. You mark your page and close it. Listening is safer than speaking." He smiles. Not cruelly, not kindly. Just a flicker of something that could go either way. "I wonder," he says, "what it's like to be so close to my father and so far from everything else." The question is loaded, of course. You study him for a moment, then reply, "It depends on the day." He doesn't laugh. "And today?" You glance at your stomach, now unmistakably rounded beneath your gown. "Today is complicated." He leans forward slightly. "They say the child is his." Your mouth tightens. "Isn't that what everyone says?" He doesn't answer, just sits back, watching you like he's trying to solve a puzzle with too many missing pieces. And then, softly, he says, "You should be careful. It's not a threat. Not quite. But it lands like one." You look him in the eyes, wondering what this is. Jealousy, protection, warning. "I am careful," you say. He shrugs. "Careful people still fall." He stands and walks away without another word. You don't breathe for a full minute after he's gone. That evening you find a note in your chamber. Unsigned, again. But in the same careful, slightly slanted hand you now recognise. The prince's handwriting. "If anything happens to you, I want you to know I tried." You burn it. Not out of fear, out of necessity. Because if the heir is circling now, then the endgame is closer than you thought. The court reacts almost immediately to the prince's sudden interest in you. You can see it ripple through the palace like heat through glass. The Queen's ladies become more tightly clustered, the ministers more tightly wound. Even the king seems unsettled, pacing during private meals, asking odd questions about your daily routines. At one point he says, "He's not to be near you." You ask who, pretending not to know. He doesn't answer. And now your pregnancy is the centre of everything. It's the storm's eye, the quiet core of a swirling chaos. You're summoned to more physicians, examined under candlelight like a relic. They measure, they nod, they whisper to each other in corners. They write things down and fold the paper 3 times before slipping it into envelopes bound for who knows where. You begin to see less of the king. He's occupied, your maid says. Meetings, papers, talks with the council. But you know the rhythm of absence now. You know when you're being protected and when you're being managed. He visits still, late at night sometimes, exhausted, affectionate, half asleep, but not as often, and never when the prince is nearby. Then comes the confrontation. A dinner. Formal, crowded, candlelit. You're not seated near the king tonight, not even close. You're placed by the window, near a cluster of foreign guests, beneath a tapestry that smells faintly of mildew and old wool. Across the room, the prince raises a glass. "To future generations," he says. Everyone drinks. No one laughs. You meet his eyes and see it there. Something daring. Something dangerous. The king doesn't raise his glass. That night your maid tells you that one of the footmen overheard a conversation between 2 ministers. Something about succession. Something about the line being blurred. You understand then the game that's unfolding. If your child is accepted, even privately, it complicates the prince's future. Not legally, perhaps, but symbolically. A rival narrative, a story that people might prefer, a different kind of heir, one born from romance instead of royal duty. And the prince knows it. He's not challenging you, not directly, but he's watching, and he's speaking just enough to be heard by the right ears. You begin avoiding him, not out of fear, but to control the story. If they're going to spin tales, let them do it without fresh material. You stay in your rooms more, walk the gardens early before sunrise. You send your maid ahead into every room. You don't eat anything unless she's tasted it first. And still, there's that feeling. That sense of being cornered in a maze you didn't design. You start writing letters, not to anyone, just to the child. Pages and pages. You describe the court, the corridors, the way sunlight filters through the stained glass windows in the eastern wing. You write about the king's laugh, about the queen's silence, about the way the court is always pretending even when no one's watching. You don't know if the child will ever read them, but you write anyway. One morning a small package arrives. No sender, no message. Inside, a gold rattle, delicate, inlaid with sapphires. Beautiful. Silent. You throw it in the fire without hesitation, because now the game isn't about staying, it's about escaping at the right moment, before someone decides that your continued existence is no longer convenient. Fact check. Royal bastards were often caught in dynastic politics, sometimes used as pawns in succession crises, especially when legitimate heirs were young, unpopular or childless. Fringe note. Some heirs kept personal mistresses or lovers from court rival factions, creating uneasy triangles between queen, mistress and next in line. Debated detail. Historians argue whether threats between heirs and royal mistresses were ever acted on, or merely postured for political gain. By now you don't trust a single hallway. Even the ones you once glided through in soft silk and brighter moods feel different, closer, darker. You notice every creak of the floorboards, every flicker in the candlelight, every conversation that cuts off just a breath too quickly as you pass. The palace is always full of eyes, but now those eyes feel sharper. You've become a subject of curiosity, of gossip, of dangerous attention. And lately you've begun to wonder if some of that attention comes from inside your own walls. It begins with the notes, short ones, unmarked. One is tucked beneath your breakfast tray. You're not alone in your room at night. Another appears inside a drawer you haven't opened in weeks. She pays your servant, the tall one. The handwriting is small and precise, not overly dramatic, but not friendly either. These aren't love letters or clumsy threats. They're information, cold, quiet, intentional. At first you think it's a trick, another round of court games, an attempt to rattle you. But the third note arrives hidden inside the lining of a glove, one you haven't worn in days. That gets your attention. Someone isn't just watching you. They're in your chambers. You tell your maid. She narrows her eyes and checks every inch of your suite. Under the mattress, behind the books, even the fireplace stones. She finds nothing, but neither of you feels better. Not when the next note arrives folded between the pages of your journal. The page you were writing on is untouched, but the message is clear. We know where you hide your secrets. You burn the note that night. But the paranoia lingers. You start watching everyone closer. The footman with the chipped tooth who always seems to be standing just near enough to overhear. The laundress who bows too low. The nursemaid who stares at your hands when you speak. It's no longer about your reputation. It's about your safety, about the child. And so, finally, after weeks of waiting, you do the one thing you've sworn not to do since arriving at court. You hire your own spy. He doesn't look like a spy, that's the point. He's short, round, affable in a forgettable way. You meet him once in the chapel garden, where no one ever lingers long enough to notice anything. He smiles, calls you milady, with a wink that makes you want to slap him. But he gets results. By the second week he confirms what you already suspected. You're being watched. 3 of your servants report to other households. One is paid by the Queen's steward, another has ties to a cardinal whose sermons lately have been pointed, and one more, someone you trusted, has been sneaking correspondence from your wastebasket. Not important things, nothing incriminating, but enough to paint stories if twisted just right. You fire all 3, of course. Not loudly, not with drama, just gone. Rooms emptied, livery returned, doors closed. Your new spy, who insists you call him D, places 2 new girls in their place. They don't speak much, he says, but they owe me. You ask no more than that. But the pressure only intensifies. One morning, you awaken to find your door slightly ajar. Nothing missing. Nothing obviously moved, but you know deep down that someone was there. You feel it in the silence, in the air itself. You sit for hours staring at the crack in the doorframe, wondering what they saw, what they touched, whether they stood above you as you slept. The king notices the change. "You've grown quiet," he says one night as you sit beside him. He reaches for your hand. Are they frightening you? You consider telling him everything. The notes, the spying, the lock that no longer clicks the same way. But something stops you. Not because you don't trust him. You do. Or you want to. But you've learned now. He protects what he loves, but only until the protection becomes too expensive. So you lie. "No," you say. "Just tired." The child makes everything heavier. He nods, satisfied. Later, when he falls asleep beside you, you sit in the moonlight, hand resting on your stomach, whispering words you don't even understand to something too small to answer back. Then comes the twist you didn't see coming. Your spy brings you news. The notes? They didn't come from the Queen's faction, or the ministers, or even the prince. They came from inside your circle. Someone loyal to you is trying to scare you. He doesn't say it outright, but the implication is clear. Someone wants you to run, not to fall, not to be ruined, just to leave before something worse happens. Maybe they care about you. Maybe they care about the child. Or maybe they know something you don't. Dee hands you the next note personally. "Delivered through the window sash," he mutters. "Risky move," it reads. "If you stay past the harvest, there will be no one left to protect you. You stare at it for a long time. Harvest is in 6 weeks. You begin planning. Not to flee, not yet, but to be ready. You increase your guards by 2. You move your most valuable things into a smaller trunk. You write 3 letters, one to your father, one to a noblewoman who still owes you a favour, and one to no one, just in case you vanish and someone needs your side of the story. You sleep lighter, eat slower, speak less. And you begin to wonder, what exactly are they afraid of? You or the child? Is it about the king's affection, about the line of succession? Or is there something darker here? Something you've never been told? One night, after a sleepless stretch, you return to the chapel garden. Alone. The stars are sharp overhead. The air is bitter, and as you walk past the old saints carved into stone, you notice something scratched into the bench where you met your spy. Just a word. Beware. You sit anyway, and whisper into the dark, "I'm not the one who should be afraid." Fact check. Private spies were commonly employed by court mistresses to monitor rivals, servants, and even members of their own households. Trust was considered a luxury. Fringe note, some noblewomen kept cipher books of coded language to send notes without revealing their sources, often using flower petals or scent combinations to carry meaning. Debated detail. Historians differ on whether mistresses were more often protected or targeted by their own factions, once their position began to weaken or endanger the court's balance. It happens just before dawn, when the palace is at its quietest, and the frost still clings to the windows like lace. You're woken by your maid's hand on your shoulder, too firm to be routine. Her face is pale, mouth pinched. "Something's happened," she whispers, already pulling you from the bed, her voice low and trembling. "Get dressed. Now." No questions, no arguments. You're on your feet in seconds, slipping into a plain wool gown, the kind you haven't worn since your first weeks at court. No corset, no jewels, no perfume, just layers. Dark, anonymous. She hands you a cloak, fastens the ties with trembling fingers. Her eyes don't meet yours. "What is it?" you ask finally. "What's wrong?" She hesitates, then murmurs, "There's been an incident. Someone died." Your mind immediately goes to the child, but no. You're still standing, still breathing. The ache in your back, the weight in your belly, all still present. Then your mind shifts. The king, the queen, the prince. She shakes her head. "Not them. One of your guards." That stops everything. A name, then another, follow like falling glass. The young one. The one who always smiled at you, who walked the outer perimeter with his hand never far from his sword. Found dead at the base of the stairwell outside your quarters. His neck twisted. No blood. No witnesses. "They're calling it an accident," your maid says. "But I don't believe in those anymore. You don't either." She opens your wardrobe and pulls out a small case, one you hadn't noticed her preparing. Inside, 2 dresses, a pair of sturdy shoes, a shawl you haven't worn since your first cold season in court. "We need to go," she says. "Not far, just for now, until we know who sent him." Who sent him? The words echo, because it wasn't a robbery, nothing was stolen, it wasn't political, the ministers wouldn't get their hands dirty, and it wasn't some jealous rival throwing a tantrum. This was quiet, precise. A message not left in ink, but in a broken body. You send word to D, the spy who's somehow become more reliable than anyone else you know. Within an hour, he's in your chamber, his face more serious than usual. "Leave now," he says without preamble. They know your schedule, your servants' names, how many times you turn in your bed at night. You've become too central to too many dangerous things. The baby makes it worse. You feel suddenly untethered, like a painting that's slipped from its frame. "But the king," Dee cuts you off, "is protected, you aren't." You pack quickly, a satchel of documents, the deed to, the villa, the journal. You slip the most important pages into your underdress. You tuck the child's blanket against your chest. You leave the portraits, the gifts, the gowns, the jewellery. They belong to another version of you, a version who might not survive the night. At the palace gates, you don't ride in a carriage, you walk. Dee has arranged a servant's uniform for you. Your maid wears the same. Hoods pulled low, steps quiet, eyes down. No guards stop you. The snow covers your tracks. By the time the sun rises, you're in the woods north of the palace, breathing in pine and frozen earth like it's the first real air you've ever known. Your hiding place is a cottage, old, barely insulated, but dry. It belongs to a retired cook who owes Dee an unspecified favour. She doesn't ask questions, just hands you a bowl of soup and a key. "You'll be safe here," she says, though the words ring like hope, not fact. For the first time in months, no one addresses you as anything but Miss. The silence is terrifying. You wait for the king's summons, for a letter, a sign. Days pass, then a week, then 2, nothing. No footsteps on the path, no royal carriage appearing through the trees, no guards pounding at the door, not even a pigeon. And you begin to ask yourself, does he know I'm gone? Does he care? Or did they finally convince him that losing me is better than keeping me? At night, you dream of the court, the sound of heels on marble, the whisper of silk, the weight of stairs and the bite of a smile you can't return. You see the queen's eyes, dark, deep, bottomless, and the prince, lurking at the edge of every dream like a shadow that refuses to step into the light. You talk to the child, you tell it stories, describe the sound of the fountains, the taste of royal pastry, the gold ceiling of the salon where your portrait still hangs, untouched, you imagine, like a myth they can't quite erase. You write more than ever. The journal is nearly full. You begin a second one. You write everything. Names, timelines, guesses. You sketch a map of your former rooms, draw the pattern of the tapestries. You're not sure who you're writing it for anymore. Maybe the child, maybe yourself, maybe the future, if there's anyone left to care. Then, one night, your maid finds something. A shoe print, deep in the snow, near the woodshed. It doesn't match hers, or yours. It's fresh. You don't sleep. 2 nights later, you hear an owl, then another call but too exact, too rehearsed. You wake your maid. You pack in silence. At dawn, Dee arrives. "Time to move," he says. "What changed?" "Someone followed your letters. They know you're here." Your maid looks at you, and for the first time you see fear, not just in her posture, but in her soul. "How long do we run?" she whispers. You don't answer, because now you're not running, you're surviving, and when the child comes, and it will, you're going to decide, once, and for all, if you'll ever go back. Fact check. Court mistresses who became pregnant were often hidden away temporarily to avoid scandal or secure legitimacy. Some gave birth in distant estates under false names. Fringe note. Some royal mistresses employed private bodyguards disguised as servants, trained to spot poison, sabotage, or attempts at abduction. Debated detail. There are conflicting reports on how involved kings were in such escapes. Some orchestrated them quietly, while others turned a blind eye once the mistress became too controversial. The cottage becomes your new kingdom, smaller, colder, and far less gilded than the one you left behind. But in its silence there's a kind of freedom you'd almost forgotten existed. You're miles from the palace, tucked into the crook of a forest too dense to echo, where no one calls you mistress or bows out of habit. Here, the wind doesn't flatter, the trees don't care, and no one's watching your every blink for signs of advantage. The days stretch longer now, not because they're easier, but because they're real. You feel each one in your bones. Your body is heavier, rounder, more tired. The child inside you shifts often, as if restless to be born, to emerge into a world that hasn't yet decided whether to welcome or condemn them. You talk to it constantly, not with sweetness, always, but with honesty. You're not supposed to exist, you whisper once, pulling the wool blanket tighter around your shoulders. But neither was I, not really. And look where that got us. Your maid adjusts quickly to country life. She was raised outside the capital and takes to chopping wood and boiling root vegetables like it's all a memory returning. You watch her build fires, dry linens, scrub floors that no longer creak under velvet slippers. You help where you can, though the swelling in your back makes it difficult. Still, you learn to do small things, grind herbs, stir broth, mend tears in your shawl. You learn how to live without silk, and yet you do not stop being watchful. Every morning you check the snow outside for prints. Every evening you listen for hooves. You keep your cloak near the door and your satchel packed. The journal is now 2 journals, tucked in the rafters wrapped in oilcloth, beside a small pouch of coins and a letter you haven't decided whether to send. Weeks pass. The king sends nothing. At first you believe it's a matter of security. Perhaps he doesn't know where you are. Maybe Dee told him, but not exactly. Or maybe he's been silenced, persuaded. Maybe the ministers cornered him with options, your affection or his throne. And in a room like that, you know which one always wins. Still, a part of you holds out hope. You reread old letters. You imagine his voice, the warmth of it on those rare nights when he spoke to you like a man, not a monarch. You remember the way he touched your stomach, briefly, like a secret he was afraid to admit he wanted to keep. But hope begins to fray. When Dee returns, weeks after your arrival, his coat is damp with sleet and his expression brittle. He hands you a sealed parchment. From a sympathetic hand, he says, not the one you're hoping for. You break the seal and read slowly. The letter is unsigned but unmistakably noble. Polished phrases, careful penmanship. It tells you what you've already guessed. The scandal at court has not quieted. The pamphlets have slowed but grown bolder. There are calls in the assembly to formally restrict mistresses from influencing royal decisions. A new sermon has been commissioned, titled The Fall of the Rose. And though your name has not been publicly condemned, the Queen has become an active presence in daily affairs. The King, absent from view, tired, reclusive. He's lost favour, the letter reads, and they blame you for it. You finish reading and sit for a long time without moving. Finally you ask Dee, did he send anyone? Even just to ask if I'm alive? Dee hesitates. No. You don't cry. You've spent those tears already. In palace rooms, in empty carriages, in your own journal's margins. Now, there is only acceptance. He will do what he must, you say, half to yourself. As I will. Dee doesn't argue. The child comes early. The first pains hit during a storm. How fitting. The wind howls through the shutters, and your maid wraps her arms around you as you double over beside the hearth. You knew this day would come, but you'd imagined more time, more quiet, more control. Instead, there's blood. There's firelight. There's screaming. You're not graceful. You're not composed. You fight like you're being torn open, because you are. Your maid works quickly, the old cook assisting when called, hands steady despite her years. You lose all sense of time. The room blurs. Heat rises in waves. Somewhere in the middle of it you beg for your mother, and somewhere after that you beg for no one. Then suddenly sound. A cry. Not yours. Sharp. Real. Alive. They place the baby in your arms and everything else stops. You look down at the wrinkled, furious little face, the damp curls, the tiny clenched fists. You don't think of court or crowns or exile or shame. You think of nothing but this impossible, breathing proof that you were never just a footnote. You made something no pamphlet can erase, something no scandal can bury. A girl, your maid says softly. You nod. You had suspected as much. Stubborn from the start, you name her quietly, not after the king, not after queens or saints, just a name that no one at court owns, a name she can grow into rather than shrink beneath. And for the first time in months you sleep. When you wake, Dee is waiting by the fire. They know, he says. Of course they do, you reply. They'll come. Let them. Because now you're not just a mistress. You're a mother, and you're no longer afraid. Fact check. While royal illegitimate children were sometimes acknowledged, girls born to mistresses were often hidden away, married off quietly, or raised in noble but obscure households. Fringe note. Some mistresses gave birth in remote cottages or monasteries, attended only by trusted servants. Many of these locations still remain unverified or lost to history. Debated detail. The emotional aftermath of such births is largely undocumented. Historians still speculate on whether these women felt triumphant, abandoned, or simply relieved to have survived. The letters begin again a week after the birth. You're still recovering, still tender and raw in every possible sense, when the first one arrives, left on the threshold like a stray pet. No seal, no signature. Just a single line scrawled in familiar royal script. I heard she's healthy. I pray you are too. You read it twice, then burn it without ceremony. Because after everything, after your exile, the silence, the cold nights where you spoke to your unborn child in the dark as if she were the only person in the world who remembered you, the word pray is not enough. Not from him, not now. And yet, it means something. He knows. He's watching, even from afar. And more importantly, he hasn't sent anyone to take her. That, in itself, is a victory. You name your daughter out loud each morning now, wrapping her in a worn shawl and walking her slowly along the narrow garden path outside the cottage. She sleeps easily during the day, her tiny face all furrowed brow and soft lips. Her hair is thick and darker than yours. You wonder if she'll have your smile, or his. You hope she gets neither. Better she carves out her own. But the victory doesn't last. On the 13th day, your maid wakes you before dawn with a whisper and a look that sends your stomach sinking. He's coming. You sit upright, heart racing. The king? She shakes her head. No, his messenger, and a carriage. The wind picks up outside. A crow caws once sharply and is gone. You dress quickly. Nothing fancy, just a clean gown and a braid to keep your hair back. Your arms ache from holding the baby all night. Your legs feel unsteady. Still, you stand tall when the door opens. The man in the doorway is lean, hooded, and holds himself like someone used to commanding silence. He bows once. His Majesty requests your return to court, he says. Not a question, not an apology, just fact. You meet his gaze. And if I decline? Then I am instructed to wait until you reconsider. He believes you will. Of course he does. You don't answer immediately. Instead, you close the door gently, walk back into the cottage, and pick up your child. She smells like milk and warmth and everything that the palace never gave you. You sit by the fire and rock her slowly, breathing in her weight, her newness, her undeniable existence. He wants us visible again, you murmur. Your maid kneels beside you. He's afraid of what people are saying. Because the stories haven't stopped. Dee keeps you informed. The pamphlets shifted tone after your disappearance. Less venom, more speculation. They ask why the king's favourite vanished. They ask why the queen suddenly appears in mourning black though no one died. Some claim you died giving birth. Others claim you've gone mad. A few even say you fled with a stolen heir. The truth, naturally, would be far too dull. You sit in silence for nearly an hour weighing it all. Then, finally you turn to the messenger. Fine, we'll go. But not in your old gowns, not in the lace or the perfume, not with a powdered face and a coquette's fan. This time, you travel as yourself, a woman who has survived exile, childbirth, scandal and silence, and come out the other side with a daughter and a name no longer tethered to someone else's shadow. The journey back to court is long and quiet. The carriage rocks gently through the countryside, through groves of birch and frozen fields that look like the bones of forgotten kingdoms. Your daughter sleeps the whole way, wrapped tight against the chill. You keep the journal on your lap, though you don't open it. Its presence is enough. When you arrive, the gates open like a yawn. The palace looms the same as ever, unchanged, smug, magnificent. You hate it instantly. You hand the baby to your maid, draw your cloak tighter and step down. The king is waiting. Not in public, of course, not on the steps, but in the small sitting room just past the east corridor, where the fire always burns low and the windows fog with breath. You're led there without ceremony. He stands when you enter, looks tired, older, but not surprised. He crosses the room slowly. "She's beautiful," he says. "She looks like you." You don't thank him. He reaches for your hand, but you pull it away, not cruelly, just firmly. "I won't return to the life I left," you say. He nods. "I didn't think you would." And she doesn't leave my sight. "She won't," he says. Then, after a long silence, "I missed you." You sit, finally, and for the first time since that awful night when your guard was found dead and your world began unravelling, you ask the question that's been burning inside your ribs for months. "Did you send anyone?" He blinks. "What do you mean?" "To find me, after I fled." Another silence. "No," he says quietly. "I couldn't. I was told." He trails off. "I thought I was protecting you." You nod, though it feels more like closure than agreement. It doesn't matter anymore. The past is ash. What remains is the future, and how much of it you'll let him have. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. That's something, at least. Over the next few days, you're given a new suite. Not your old one. This one is farther from the queen, farther from the throne, but still gilded, still watched. They make no secret of your return. Servants bow. Ministers nod stiffly. The court begins reshaping itself again to accommodate your reappearance like a tide shifting to make room for a rock. But you are not the same woman who left. You attend only the events you choose. You refuse new jewels, you refuse new gowns. The baby becomes your shield, your excuse, your centerpiece. No one dares criticize you now, not openly. A mother is a sacred figure, even if she shares no wedding ring. The queen sends no message. The prince sends no gift. You're content with their silence. What matters now is this. You came back on your own terms, not as a lover, not as a threat, not even as a symbol, as someone who can no longer be erased. Fact check. Royal mistresses who returned to court after childbirth were rare but not unheard of. Some leveraged their child's existence to regain status or negotiate favour. Fringe note. A few illegitimate royal daughters went on to become mistresses themselves, raised in the same courts that once condemned their mothers. Debated detail. Scholars remain divided on whether royal lovers were truly ever welcomed back, or merely tolerated to avoid further scandal. You don't return with fire, you return with frost. Not coldness exactly, but clarity. You walk the same marbled halls where you once floated in perfumed gowns and gilded smiles, and you see everything now as it really is. The court hasn't changed. It never does. People still move like dancers, still speak in riddles, still fold lies into lace. The only difference is you. You're no longer part of the performance. You're something else. The whispers start within hours of your arrival. A servant girl knocks over a tray in shock when she sees you alive. A minor duchess gasps audibly as you pass. But she starts, before snapping her fan shut like a blade. One minister coughs nervously and bows a little too deeply, and still no one speaks your name outright. They use titles you were never given and never earned. Her, the other lady, the mother. The king does not announce your return formally. He doesn't need to. He attends your chamber twice in 3 days, but you do not allow him past the sitting room. You serve tea. You let him speak. You say very little. He seems smaller now, though not in stature. He's been diminished by time, by pressure, by guilt, or maybe just by your eyes, which no longer adore him without question. Your daughter becomes the centre of your world, and theirs. They're fascinated, of course, not because of who she is, but what she represents. A royal scandal wrapped in swaddling cloth, a reminder that power can break protocol, that intimacy can outmaneuver law. You do not hide her. You do not parade her either. You take her into the gardens in the late morning sun. You cradle her beneath the great oak where queens once posed for portraits. You sit quietly as noblewomen pretend not to sneak glances and whisper behind. Hand-stitched fans. The court tries to categorize her. Bastard, or blessing, a threat, or an embarrassment. You let them guess. The queen still hasn't acknowledged you. She passes you in the corridor one morning, flanked by her ladies-in-waiting, her chin high and gaze straight ahead. You curtsy just slightly, not out of deference but dignity. She does not pause. But one of her ladies, one who once flirted with your ruin, drops a glove as they pass. You watch it fall. You watch her hesitate, then keep walking. You bend to pick it up, hand it to a footman and smile as if to say, "We all drop things sometimes. You're not naive. You know this peace is temporary. Your return has upset balances. Certain nobles grow cold, certain favours dry up. One ambassador, who once sang your praises at court dinners, now pretends he doesn't remember your name. Fine, let him forget. You don't need his words, but others draw nearer. A dowager countess, once a bitter opponent of yours, invites you to tea. It's time, she says, that we women stop letting the men write the stories. She's sharp, brittle, and too clever by half. You like her instantly. Over weak tea and 2 sweet cakes, she offers you what no one has before: strategy. She suggests names, ladies who might quietly support you if not openly, servants who can be trusted, courtiers who value influence over lineage. Don't fight them, she says, waving her cane toward the palace. Absorb them. You listen, you take notes, you learn, and you begin hosting again. Small at first, quiet, tasteful evenings with music and poetry, and no politics on the surface, but always something simmering beneath. You invite musicians with sharp tongues, playwrights with banned plays. One evening, a visiting artist sketches your daughter sleeping and murmurs, "She looks like someone who'll set things on fire." You frame the sketch. The king visits less frequently now, not because he doesn't want to, but because he's realizing, slowly, that you're no longer waiting for him. You're not his haven anymore. You're your own. When he does visit, he's careful, brings little gifts for the child, asks permission before entering, watches you with a sadness he doesn't know how to hide. "You've changed," he says once, almost accusing. "Yes," you reply, "I had to." One afternoon you receive a message from the prince, not a letter, a formal invitation to a court assembly, a rare ceremonial event meant to showcase unity and tradition. You are not expected to attend. Your presence is controversial, unlisted, and still whispered about, and yet the invitation bears the royal seal. A challenge, a trap, an olive branch. You go. You wear blue silk, no embroidery, no jewels. You walk in quietly, heads turn, mouths tighten. The queen is there, seated like a statue, her crown catching the candlelight. The prince rises when you enter. He doesn't smile, but he nods. Once, sharply. Then turns back to the room. You're seated near the back, but you're present. And that is everything. Later you find another note. This one from D. They're watching to see if you'll overreach. Don't, so you don't. You do nothing flashy. You make no speeches. You write no letters to newspapers. You simply remain. You appear. You exist where they hoped you wouldn't. And gradually the tone shifts. Whispers turn into questions. What if she stays? What if the child is educated here? What if she's not dangerous at all, but useful? A minor minister asks to speak with you about supporting a new school for orphans. A playwright dedicates a sonnet to the shadow mother of the realm. A foreign envoy asks, not so subtly, whether the girl might one day marry into a foreign house. You say nothing. You smile. Because now you're not asking for space. You've taken it. And for the first time since you stepped into the palace all those months ago, you're not chasing favour. You're being courted. Not by lovers, but by history. Fact check. Some royal mistresses who bore children were quietly integrated back into court life, eventually serving as political figures behind the scenes, especially in cultural or philanthropic roles. Fringe note. One mistress was said to wear an invisible crown, woven from the hair of her child, hidden in her wig as a silent symbol of power beyond titles. Debated detail. Historians argue whether these women were ever truly respected by the court, or merely tolerated for their usefulness until replaced once again. You begin to write it all down, not in the journal this time. That little book of cramped lines and midnight truths already feels too crowded, too intimate. No, this is something else, something slower, deliberate. You borrow parchment from the palace archives, quills from your steward, ink so dark it gleams purple when it dries. You close the doors, bolt them, and begin writing the memoir that no one has asked for and everyone would kill to read. You start with the first velvet summons, the way your name first slipped between the lips of courtiers with knowing glances and dangerous grins. You describe the day the king looked at you across a room full of powdered faces, and you realised, far too late, what it meant to be noticed. Then you write about the first gift, the first whispered warning, the first time you knew you'd never belong to yourself again. Each word is measured, each paragraph a small war. You do not soften, you do not romanticize. You write what was, not what might be remembered. You include names, carefully, not out of revenge, but because the truth has a weight that needs to be placed evenly on the scales. The duchess who tried to poison your food, the cardinal who blessed your child in secret, the queen, silent and steel-eyed, the prince circling you like a hawk who didn't yet know he was afraid. But you do not paint yourself as innocent either. You include your vanity, your mistakes, the way you relished the power once you had it, the thrill of being the axis around which everything else spun, the sick satisfaction you felt the night the queen flinched at the mention of your name. You write it all. Because if this memoir is to be your legacy, it will not be fiction. Your daughter sleeps beside you as you write. Sometimes she fusses, and you pause to feed her, to rock her, to hum an old lullaby you can't remember learning. Sometimes she watches you, eyes wide and impossibly still, as if even now she knows that what you're doing matters. And sometimes, when the palace is too loud, too formal, too full of history that doesn't yet include you, you take her hand and whisper, "I'm writing this for you, so they never lie about us." You don't tell anyone what you're doing, not even your maid, though she suspects you're sure. She watches your locked drawer too often for it to be coincidence, but she says nothing. That's her skill, after all, silence. As your reputation shifts again, subtly, like a tide beneath calm water, your quill moves faster. They begin calling you Her Grace, in hushed tones. Not official, of course. No title has been granted. But courtiers cling to titles like rafts in a storm. They'll invent one if it helps them navigate the social seas. You do not correct them. Why should you? You've survived more than most duchesses ever dreamed of. Your rooms are expanded. A tutor is offered for your child, subtly, through a mutual contact in the court. You accept, with conditions. Female, educated, discreet. You meet the candidates yourself. Dee helps vet them. You choose one with grey hair, a gentle voice, and a spine of iron. The Queen remains quiet. A powerful kind of quiet. But one evening, during a state dinner, you catch her watching you across the banquet hall. She's surrounded by people, as always, but her gaze is fixed on you, just for a moment. You don't look away, you nod once. So does she. It's not forgiveness, it's recognition. And that may be the most honest exchange either of you has ever had. The king, for his part, keeps his distance now. When he does visit, it's brief, thoughtful, oddly reverent. He touches the child's head, asks about her sleep, says little else. Once he stays long enough to say, "You've done something I couldn't." You ask what he means. He looks down at the child, eyes soft. You made a future that doesn't belong to the past. It sounds like poetry, or guilt. You don't press him. The writing consumes your nights. You write until your hand aches, until the candles burn to stumps, until your maid knocks softly and says, "You need to rest." But you don't rest. Not yet. Not while the memories are still warm enough to hold. You write about the day you fled, the broken guard, the frost on the windows, the shoe print that didn't belong to anyone you knew. You describe the panic, the silence, the way. Your breath sounded louder than your heartbeat. You write about Dee, about how loyalty sometimes comes from shadows instead of thrones. You write about the Queen's smile, that tight, practiced curve of lips that meant everything and nothing. You wonder aloud in your writing whether she ever truly hated you, or just hated what you symbolized, and whether, if the world had been different, the two of you might have stood side by side instead of across a battlefield made of ballrooms and prayer books. You write about the child, about how a kick saved you from a poisoned tart, about the first time she laughed, about the way her hand curls around your finger like she's anchoring you to this earth. You write because you know what's coming next. Power never leaves a vacuum, and you've become a force now, something people account for, something they circle around. There are rumours already that you'll publish your memoir, that it will destroy half the court, that it contains secrets so dangerous they could bring down dynasties. You smile at the exaggeration. But still, you keep writing. Because even if you never publish it, even if it stays hidden forever in a locked drawer beneath the velvet lining of your desk, you know one day your daughter will read it, and she will know who you were. Not just the stories they tell, but the truth. And maybe, when she's old enough to walk these halls on her own, she won't flinch when they whisper her name. Maybe she'll whisper back. Fact check. A few surviving personal letters and memoirs from royal mistresses have shaped modern understanding of court life more than any official document. Fringe note. One mistress was rumoured to have sewn coded phrases into her dresses. Her memoir wasn't written in ink but in threads, unravelled only by descendants. Debated detail. Scholars still question whether certain court memoirs were truly written by the mistresses themselves or ghost-written by sympathetic nobles and staff. You see her from across the terrace, standing exactly where you once stood, elbows resting lightly on the balustrade, face tilted to catch the light. The first thing you notice is the gown, soft rose silk, not too fine but carefully cut to flatter. Then the earrings, too large for the hour, and the way her fingers flutter when she laughs. You recognise all of it, not because you've seen her before, but because you know the script. The new one has arrived. You don't ask her name. You learn it, of course. Everyone does, within days. The court clings to names like lifelines, especially when they're attached to scandal still blooming. She's young, striking in that dewy, petal-fresh way, and she doesn't know yet that the compliments she's gathering like coins are really promises to be broken. She moves like you once did, charmed, slightly dazed, a little drunk on the power of being watched. You sit with your daughter on the garden bench and watch it unfold. The king is slower. Now. He doesn't chase exactly. He observes, allows himself to be amused. A single rose sent to her chamber, a new harpist assigned to her wing, a pair of gloves mysteriously embroidered with her initials in thread too fine for a common order. All of it careful, elegant, harmless for now. You feel no jealousy. You're far beyond that. You just feel weary for her. She looks like a lamb in a lion's den, your maid mutters one afternoon, glancing over her shoulder. Does she know what it means to be chosen? You doubt it. How could she? Being chosen sounds beautiful, until you learn what the role requires. It isn't about love, it's about usefulness, silence, timing, knowing when to disappear and when to smile like you're not bleeding. You wonder if she's been told about the cold mornings, the cruel pamphlets, the nights spent waiting for footsteps that never come. Probably not. She's still glowing. At a court supper 2 weeks later, you're seated 3 chairs away from her. She doesn't look at you directly, but her glances stray in your direction like moths circling a flame. She's curious, you can tell. She knows who you are. They've told her, of course, or worse, they haven't. Which means she's left to stitch the rumours together on her own. You reach for your glass and feel her gaze land softly on your hand. You smile, not with kindness, but with recognition. A quiet signal across the table. I know what you're stepping into, even if you don't. She doesn't smile back, but she doesn't look away either. That night, you find a note slipped into your writing desk. Not sealed, just folded and weighted with a hairpin. Do you regret it? No name, no signature. But you know it's from her. You don't answer, not directly. But the next day you leave a book in the corridor where she passes. A slim volume of poetry, worn at the edges. Inside you've underlined a single line. The rose never asked to be a symbol, that's all. She never thanks you. But 2 days later, she wears a plain blue gown to supper. No jewels, no fans. Her hair braided like a village girl. The court murmurs. The Queen lifts an eyebrow. The King notices. Of course he does, but says nothing. And you realise she's learning. You remember being taught the same way. Not by tutors or advisors, but by the place itself, by bruises, by glances, by lessons you can only learn by enduring them. You were thrown into the lion's mouth and told to tame it, and somehow you did. But it cost you things no one ever warned you about. Trust, softness, your own name said kindly. Now, someone else is beginning that journey, and that, oddly enough, brings a new kind of freedom. You're no longer the centre, no longer the subject of every sideways glance and courtly jest. The eyes are drifting, slowly, away from you and toward her. That's not a loss. It's an opening. Space to breathe. to move without the weight of expectation, to begin, shaping your next act while no one's quite sure where you'll land. You watch as the girl is led down the same corridors where you once floated, her new maid carrying a stack of silks and lace, her face flush with anticipation. She'll learn soon enough about the duties, the debts, the invisible wounds. She'll find herself in rooms too quiet, with mirrors that don't lie. You almost pity her. Almost. But pity is a luxury now. You don't have time for it. You're writing more than ever. 3 volumes filled, a 4th begun. The memoir is no longer just a story. It's a map, a manual, a mirror for anyone bold enough to look closely. You've begun organising the chapters. You separate the public from the personal, the rumours from the facts. You don't soften your judgments, but you sharpen your insights. You write about power and how it always demands a toll. You write about men who don't understand the kingdoms they inherit, and women who learn to rule anyway, in the shadows. You write about legacy. Your daughter learns to walk just as the new mistress begins to stumble. It's subtle at first. A misplaced comment, a missed supper, a sleeve torn from someone else's gown in a corridor too narrow to be innocent. The king grows quiet again. The court watches, hungry. The prince smiles too often when she speaks. You know the pattern, and she's stepping into it, one jewel-encrusted boot at a time. You take your daughter to the chapel one morning, early enough to avoid the watchers. You light a candle, not for yourself or even the child, but for her, the girl who replaced you before she even knew what role she'd been cast in. You whisper a prayer that sounds more like a warning, and then you leave it behind, because you have more important things now. Fact check. It was common for kings to cycle through multiple mistresses during a single reign. Some overlapped, while others were retired, quietly with titles or land. Fringe note. A few mistresses kept informal codebooks to warn or mentor their successors, though only fragments survive in private collections. Debated detail. Some argue that rivalry between mistresses was often exaggerated by historians looking for drama, where there was mostly survival. Your name is slipping. Not disappearing exactly, but softening at the edges like ink left out in the rain. The gossip has moved on, new mistresses, fresh scandals, the prince's latest political posturing, the queen's calculated charities. Your name still echoes through the palace halls, yes, but quieter now. Fewer smirks, more glances of recognition, not intrigue. You're becoming part of the wallpaper, known, respected, but no longer necessary to the daily pulse of power. And that, surprisingly, is a relief. You walk through the palace now without needing to straighten your back or measure your breath. People nod, some smile, a few bow out of reflex, but no one tries to own your story anymore. You're no longer the king's latest distraction or the court's favourite whisper. You've become something harder to define. A survivor, a symbol, a myth that somehow didn't end in disgrace. Still, you wonder what they'll say when you're gone. You hear it, sometimes, already forming, at the edge of garden parties, between sips of wine and bites of spiced plum. She was clever. She was dangerous. She kept her child. She wrote things no one else dared. Every version is slightly wrong, but you've accepted that. History is stitched together by people who rarely read past the headline. The child, your daughter, is growing fast now. She has your chin, your stubbornness, and his eyes. You don't speak his name aloud anymore, not in her presence. You refer to him as the king now, when you must. She knows who he is. You haven't hidden that from her, but you've never let her think he was her future. Her future belongs to her alone. You've begun considering leaving court altogether. The idea used to terrify you. Once this place was your identity. Now it feels like a costume you no longer need to wear. The gold ceilings and endless corridors no longer impress. They exhaust. Your daughter has begun asking why the guards outside your chamber never smile, why the other children in the palace aren't allowed to play with her. You have no good answers, and you realise that if you stay too long, she might begin to believe something is wrong with her, not the world around her. So you make plans, quiet ones. You reach out to the Dowager Countess, your unlikely ally, and she arranges a villa in the south. Small, sunlit, far from the capital. Plenty of olives and not a single powdered wig in sight, she promises. You smile for the first time that day. Dee agrees to accompany you, at least until you're settled. Your maid, loyal as ever, begins folding dresses with a kind of reverent efficiency. Still, you delay. because some part of you, small but persistent, wants to stay just long enough to hear how the stories end. One story in particular, the new mistress, the girl. She's fading, like you knew she would. The court is already searching for her replacement. Her once sparkling laugh has dulled into nervous silence. Her gowns are less daring, her cheeks thinner. You pass her in the corridor one afternoon and she startles. Actually startles, like she's seen a ghost. You stop, let her catch her breath. "She said I'd end up like you," she whispers. You raise an eyebrow. "The Queen?" A nod. You almost laugh. "You should be so lucky." And then you walk on. But that night you write her a note. You leave it unsigned. You will survive. If you know when to stop performing, you don't wait for a reply. You know she won't send one. Instead, you focus on packing. The journals, now 7 in total, go first. Carefully wrapped, double-strapped, sealed inside a travelling chest lined with lavender and folded shawls. Your daughter's. Paintings, wild scribbles of gardens and birds and a son that always wears a crown, are tucked into the inner pocket. You write a new letter to your future self and place it beneath the first page of the original journal. You want to remember what it cost to be remembered. And then there's the portrait. You've avoided it for months, still hanging in the side hall, between an oil of a forgotten duke and an absurd rendering of a hunting dog. You walk past it at dusk when the corridors are empty. You stare at the version of yourself locked in frame. Young, painted soft and mysterious, lips parted in a secret the painter never knew. You touch the corner of the frame. "They wanted me to vanish," you murmur, and then you do. You leave the next morning before sunrise. No parade, no farewell supper, just you, your daughter, your maid, and Dee in a quiet carriage that hums like a lullaby against the road. The palace fades behind you like a story you're finally done rereading. The sky blooms with that early pink that always feels too fragile to last. But it does. It always does. You arrive at the villa to birdsong and stone warmed by sun. The walls are plain, the windows tall. There is a fig tree in the garden, and a well that sings when the wind is right. You unpack slowly. Your daughter chases lizards across the stone paths. Dee stands in the archway and says, "It suits you." You nod. It does. In time, you settle. You plant herbs. You read by candlelight. You write the final pages of your memoir. And one night, years later, long after your hair has begun to silver at the edges, you find a letter at your door, unmarked. Inside, a single line. "I named her after you." You don't know who sent it. You fold it once, then place it between the last pages of your journal, because it doesn't matter anymore who writes the stories. What matters is that you existed, and that someone remembered. Fact check. Royal mistresses who withdrew from court often lived on estates granted by the crown or allied noble families. Some continued to influence politics from afar. Fringe note, a few royal portraits of unnamed women are believed by modern historians to be depictions of disgraced mistresses, their identities quietly erased from official records. Debated detail. Scholars still argue whether the written legacies of royal mistresses, memoirs, letters, hidden diaries, were intended for history or just survival. Years pass, as they always do, not in grand, sweeping gestures, but in slow, quiet moments that only feel significant once they've become memory. The villa becomes home. Not the kind of home with embroidered crests and orchestras at dinner, but one made of creaking shutters, warm bread, and mornings spent watching the sun stretch across stone floors. The life you lived before, the palace, the politics, the gloved betrayals, it all begins to feel like a book someone else wrote in your name. Your daughter grows like ivy, strong and winding, and impossible to contain. She runs barefoot through the vineyard paths. She sings when she thinks no one is listening. She asks questions the court never dared ask. "Why do they call you a mistress?" she asks one evening, looking up from a book with the brutal honesty of youth. You pause over your knitting. The fire pops. You think for a moment. It's a word people use when they're afraid of how much power a woman has without being given permission to have it. She nods slowly, then shrugs. That sounds like their problem. And just like that, you realise she's already more dangerous than you ever were. The memoir is complete now. 7 volumes written in your hand, every word measured like a heartbeat. You don't publish it, not yet. You're not ready to let it loose into the world. Instead, you bind them tightly, tuck them into a cedar chest, and hide the key where only your daughter will ever think to look. You write her a letter to go with it, folded and sealed with wax. On the envelope you scrawl, "For when you're old enough to stop asking permission. You're not hiding anymore, you're simply resting." Sometimes you still get letters from the capital, visits every few seasons, usually with a bottle of wine and a pouch of dried gossip. He tells you the Queen has aged into something formidable and quiet, that the Prince is married now, miserably of course, that your name still lingers in court conversation, more legend than person. "They talk about you the way children talk about thunder," he says once. "Distant, loud, a little afraid." You laugh at that. You've earned it. The king is dead. It happened suddenly, though everyone claims they expected it. His health had waned for years. The official statement calls it peaceful. The truth is probably less tidy. You receive the news in the garden, kneeling by a row of newly planted lavender. A rider arrives with the message tucked in a blue ribbon. You read it once, then fold it without expression. Your daughter watches from the steps. "Are you sad?" she asks. "You consider this?" "No," you say gently. "Just full." Because it wasn't love, not really. Or maybe it was once, before it became a negotiation written in silk and blood. He gave you power, and then tried to cage you in it. He gave you affection, and then turned it into reputation. He gave you a child, your child, and that above everything is what remains. The court holds a funeral so elaborate it borders on ridiculous. You don't attend. Not out of protest, but because you no longer need to perform grief for a man who never learned to hold yours. Instead, you light a single candle in the chapel near the fig grove, kneel in silence and whisper, "You gave me a beginning. That was enough." A week later a letter arrives with the royal seal. Not from the Queen, not from the Prince, from the Crown itself. They invite you, politely, formally, to return. Not as a mistress, not as a scandal, but as a guest of honour at a ceremony to recognise contributions made to the cultural and social heritage of the realm. You almost choke on your tea. It's a gesture, of course, a carefully calculated act of historical laundering. They want to wrap up the past with a bow, reclaim the woman who once threatened to unravel them, turn you into a name in a footnote, manageable, acceptable, sanitised. You decline, not with venom, just grace. You write back, thank them for their kind words and explain, gently, that you've already lived that life, that your daughter deserves to grow in sunlight, not shadow, that you've said everything you needed to say already, and if they ever truly want to hear it, they'll know where to look. Years go by, you age. The mirror softens you, the seasons too. Wrinkles gather in the corners of your eyes. Your hair turns silver at the temples. You wear fewer rings. Your laughter is deeper now, earned, not performed. You still walk the garden most mornings. Your daughter joins you when she can, arm in arm. She's taller now, wiser. Her eyes don't ask, they command. One night, as the moon hangs low and heavy above the hills, she asks if she can read the memoir. You nod. It's yours. She stays up all night reading it. You find her in the morning at the kitchen table, eyes red, hair wild, a cup of untouched tea beside her. She looks up at you and says, "You made history afraid of you." And for the first time you believe it, not because you were the loudest, not because you were the most beautiful, but because you endured, because they wrote you off, and you wrote yourself back in. You go to sleep that night knowing the story is safe now. Not in books, in blood. Fact check. Some royal mistresses lived well into old age, witnessing entire reigns pass while retaining quiet influence through letters, family alliances, or inherited estates. Fringe note. At least one royal mistress reportedly buried her memoir in a wine cask beneath her garden, discovered decades later by accident and dismissed as fiction. Debated detail. Modern scholars argue whether the true legacy of court mistresses lies in politics or storytelling, in how they shaped history, or how they ensured they were remembered at all.